poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
The largest union talk radio program in the southern United States. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Folks, we are coming to you from the past right now. This is a pre-taped episode. Appreciate you tuning in, but both Adam and I are out of town today. So we're not able to do the show live, but we wanted to bring you, still get a show for you. So we got a couple of new segments along with some good evergreen Unions 101 stuff that we like to replay every now and then, because that's a big reason that we started the show was Unions 101, public education. So we're going to be doing some of that today. You can leave us a voicemail at any time. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave us a written note at any time at tvlr.fm/contact. We wanted to start the show with talking about pensions in the state of Alabama. They have... Reason has just released a report about the purported debt and destruction that the state's pension system is levying on its people. And, we see this as the anti-worker lobby trying to gear up for an attack on the state's pension system, and we want to start ringing the alarm now so that people are not surprised when it comes in earnest. It's not going to come this legislative session, but next legislative session, it'll be the first year of the quadrennium. They will be, legislators will be the most insulated from the voters that they will ever be. It'll be, next year, they will have just gotten elected. It'll be 4 years until they face another election, so it'll be the easiest at that time for them to attack state workers' pensions. So we need to be ready for this, and because I think it's coming. Before we talk about, Adam has read Reason's report, the article about it, and we're going to talk about that. But before we talk about Reason's report, we wanted to I wanted to talk a little bit, give folks a little bit of kind of a historical context, because when this comes, and I believe it will come. I do not if you've listened to the show a long time, you know that I'm not in the prediction making business. I don't do that a lot, but I think that this is coming. It will not be the first time that the pension of Alabama's workers has been attacked, and Adam has been around for some of these attacks. So I figured that it would make sense for Adam to talk to us about about what that's looked like in the past. So Adam, appreciate you taking the time to pre-tape this with me during the weekday, during an evening instead of eating dinner with the family. So Adam, talk to us about what has happened in the fight over the state's pension system in the past, and how has this been framed?
Sure. Well, let me just say that we could go way back and take, many, many decades of fights and talk about those. I don't want to do that today, but, the state pension system, it has a lot of money comparatively in Alabama. And so lawmakers are always going to be enticed by that. Other interests are always going to be enticed by that. Whenever you have a big pot of money, people want to put their hands in it. And so, for example, the AEA, the Alabama Education Association, really cut its teeth as a statewide force politically, fighting with Governor George Wallace back in the early 70s. Around defending the state pension system. But the pension, the teacher retirement system and the employer retirement system, which makes up the retirement system of Alabama, it is something that has really been a success story for the state. It has been pretty successful. It has kept a lot of people in their homes and, paying their bills. And it has been able to survive and thrive all this time, even as I know some other pension funds across the country have had troubles. But after the Great Recession, back in, '08, in that time frame, things kind of took a turn. And what we saw in 2010, of course, was the Republican takeover of the state legislature. Shortly after that, so 2011, 2012, that time frame, the state pension system was a big topic of debate. And there were a series of reforms that were passed, ostensibly to save the pension system. And, what it amounted to, of course, was cuts for a lot of people. And that was in the form of employee contributions. So the teachers and custodians and other employees, they had to pay more out of their paycheck for the retirement system. And they also created a second tier, so tier two employees, which I believe was 2012, 2013, somewhere in that time frame when that took effect. So anyone hired in after that is on tier two, which is a significantly lower benefit. You have to work longer and your benefit's smaller. And so that's been a real challenge for school districts and other public sector employers to try to recruit people, because now the state pension system is just not as attractive as it used to be as an employee benefit. But that said, the state pension system itself is remarkably strong, and has been pretty consistent despite all the different changes in the economy across the country. And it's always been a subject of right-wing attack, because there are these so-called free market fundamentalists out there who really don't like the fact that state employees have a pension, a defined benefit pension plan. They don't like the fact that gives the retirement system of Alabama some degree of power and authority. They don't like the fact that public sector workers have this benefit, period, frankly. And there's some, there is always some special interest. I'm thinking of the John Arnold Foundation was one that was hard and heavy in Alabama at some point back in those early years of the recession. Like I said, after the Republican takeover. So 2011, 2012, that time frame, there were a lot of attacks on the pension system, a lot of misinformation put out. And there was a lot of grassroots effort to push back on that. There was a Save Our RSA movement that sprung up, and there were a couple of firefighters from Huntsville really took the lead on setting that up, and attracted a lot of retirees, a lot of active employees from across different industries in the public sector. So that was really exciting to see, and in the years since then, it's been relatively quiet. And so you haven't seen a whole lot of talk about the pension being a problem or needing further reform, which I guess leads us to this article that you tipped me off about that we found recently.
Yeah, I think it might be worth dwelling just for another second on the fact that these types really do not. They want to make working for the public sector as unenviable as possible, because really the goal is to sabotage the public sector so that they can go and they can turn back and say, look at how bad the public sector is performing. We need to privatize it. That's why we have to have quote unquote school choice. That's why we have to privatize the VA. And so that it's part of a long-term plan to undermine the effectiveness of the public sector, because even with the tier one pension, it's not like public school teachers in Alabama were, getting rich. They were able to have a respectable living, right?
Right, that's right. And, let's be honest, there were folks who wanted 401ks instead of a defined benefit pension plan. And that's a stark difference.
Right.
It's a big difference. And there are folks who would benefit financially were it to go to a 401k, right? And were they to manage those accounts or get in on that. And so, there's a lot of self-interest in some of it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Part of it is sabotage of the public sector and to make it unattractive, and to weaken the kind of benefits package that working people are, wanting to expect. I mean, and that's the thing. When you go into most jobs in the state of Alabama, that are public sector, that are for the state of Alabama, whether it's your local school district or, other members of this retirement system, typically you're getting paid less than private sector counterparts, right? Like, if you have a math degree and you go teach math, you're probably making less salary wise than you would in the private sector. But one benefit that you have is typically you have better benefits, right? And so that's a benefit that we have to defend, and I think it's always something that you have to defend because there will always be special interests who want to profit, who want to take money out of it, who want to borrow money out of it for special projects, right? And it's always some kind of emergency. And so those things have happened from time to time over the pensions history. And, let's not forget that people pay into this their whole careers, right? You spend the best years of your life at this job. Every month out of that paycheck, you're paying into it. And it's not a lot to ask for a dignified retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's worth saying even, if you want to teach math in particular, you'll make less working for the public sector as a high school teacher than you would working for the public sector for the federal government. I mean, that's literally the situation that I was faced with a math degree. I could go and work for the federal government, which is what I did, and make, immediately something like 30 or 40% more instead of being a math teacher, which is something that I had always kind of been interested in doing. And the pay was just so little that I, ended up deciding not to do that and went a different direction. So, and I know that there are a lot of people that have that kind of face that path that would like to, if they could make a similar salary, similar compensation as they could in other professions as a teacher, they would be interested in being a teacher, but they can't. And then on top of the lower salary, now, people are trying, people would like to take away some of the benefits that make it kind of bearable. So yeah, it's really so that brings us to this article from Reason. Reason is a libertarian magazine. They have a foundation called the Reason Foundation, which purports to do research around issues of economics and stuff like that. And so they've got this report out about Alabama's unrealistic pension assumptions. Adam, what are they saying here?
Well, best I can understand, Reason is arguing that the state of Alabama's retirement system has too much unfunded liability, and that they are making unrealistic assumptions in terms of their average returns per year, which I know we're kind of getting in the weeds here on pensions, but that's the gist of it. And they brought out in the article a little bit about those earlier reforms that increased employee contributions and the second tier that was created. And of course, they praised those as good things. And what I found interesting was, so they brought out these issues they're claiming to have identified. And we'll get to the response from the retirement system in a moment. But yeah, so they claim these issues. And I was unclear exactly what their solution was. They were kind of sounding the alarm, but I wasn't exactly sure what they were proposing.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jacob, I don't know. Like maybe you have more insight on how you read that, but I was unclear on what exactly they were trying to get across. Like, you have to assume that their math is correct, and that everything is on the up and up here with this study. But even if you assume all of that, what exactly are they calling for?
Well, one thing that they do call for is specifically lowering the assumed rate of return. They say, quote, the path forward isn't complicated, even if it comes with growing pains. Lowering the assumed rate of return towards something closer to the demonstrated long-term performance would increase the required state contributions and raise the measured unfunded liability in the short term, but it would give legislators and the public a more accurate picture of what the retirement system actually costs. Alabama lawmakers made great strides in reforming the state's retirement system for government workers back in 2012, but growing debt and runaway costs suggest the need for further reforms to the system's market return assumptions. Lowering return expectations to more realistic levels will require more from government employers up front, but it will slow the state's current path of ever-growing annual contributions placed on the backs of taxpayers, driven by the ongoing realization of more pension debt. To get the state back on track with pension funding, policymakers need to enact lasting reforms that address the source of the state's growing pension shortfall. So that's the only specific thing is you got to fix the assumed rate of return. And I guess we're going to talk about broadly, like, why is this coming now? Are there other ways to plug in the quote unquote hole in the pension system? But before we get to that I think that can bring us to the RSA's response to this study. What did they say?
Well, they basically said their math was wrong, which, and that's what I was thinking as I was reading this article from Reason. I was like, I'm really having to buy that what you're selling here. Like, I have to really go out on a limb and assume that you're being genuine. And, the retirement system pointed out that they were very selective in how they picked these numbers and how they picked the years they looked at. And when RSA showed their work, so to speak, didn't seem to be a problem to me. Like, it seemed like the assumed rate of returns was totally on point. Didn't seem like there was some kind of massive debt problem that is going to impact all of us as taxpayers. And they also pointed out that they worked with 3 different actuaries on any changes they've made, and I kind of inferred like, we trust these people more than we do your report,
right?
Which seems really fair.
Yeah, well, so they didn't say specifically the math was wrong, but that it's cherry-picked math, right? And so here's from the letter that they sent. The Reason Foundation claims that the RSA's 7.45% assumed rate of return is too high. As the basis for its conclusion, the Reason Foundation picks the random benchmark of the past 24 years, which did have an average investment return of 6.4%. But, they say, as with all pension systems where investments are made long-term, it's prudent to look at historical investment returns, not just one random snapshot in time. If you look at all the numbers going back 40 years, RSA has exceeded the 7.45 assumed rate of return in all years, with the exceptions of years 20, 25, and 30. And even then, those years were not terribly far off. Since adopting the 7.45 assumed rate of return, RSA's annual average investment return has been 9.97%, exceeding the assumed rate of return by 2.52%, right? So, they're saying the whole crux of the report is that the assumed rate of return is too high, and the delta between the reality, the idea that they're trying to put in your head, right, is that the delta between the reality and the assumption is creating this big hole. And actually, ever since that assumption has been put into place, the RSA has been beating that assumption. And over the past 40 years, in basically every year, they beat that assumption with the exception of a few years. So, it's
and isn't that coincidental that they found a way to paint that picture despite all the other years, right?
Right. Yeah, and so, it's probably worth now talking about, like, why would people like the Reason Foundation be interested in pushing this narrative about the, unfunded liabilities and the quote-unquote problems with Alabama's pension system, even though by all by all metrics that we have, it seems like it's doing basically fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, you have to ask why they would want to put this out into the conversation. And I think, we have to be proactive and think about it, because anytime there's an economic downturn, folks are going to want to come for your retirement. I mean, that's just how it is. Like, that's always going to be on the table. And like I said earlier, it is a big pot of money. It's always enticing. And I think we have to be mindful that there are folks who want to do away with defined benefit pension plans. Like, they do not want those to exist anymore. They want it to all be 401k kind of plans, and they want their cut of that. And so that's something I think we have to be mindful of. And I think that there's a reason that Reason is putting this out there. Like you pointed out earlier, next year could be an interesting year for the legislature. It'll be the new quadrennium, new folks, and new budget problems, right? The general fund budget is going to have issues because of the one big beautiful bill that Congress passed, H.R. 1. It's going to cost almost, or at least $175 million extra just to keep food stamps, the SNAP program. And so you've got that in the general fund, and then the education budget is leaking money to the Choose Act and all the private school vouchers that they've been giving out. And so you add those in with the tax breaks they've been giving out year after year, and it starts to converge on an economy that is not looking so great. And our tax system is heavily reliant on sales taxes. So if there's a downturn in the economy and there's less folks, purchasing goods and services, there's less sales tax revenue, right? And so you could just sort of see like some things converging that makes me a little spooked that we could be in an environment of austerity again. If not next year, maybe the year after. It just seems like we could be heading that way. And maybe we're not, and hopefully we're not. But if we are, we have to be prepared for it. And I don't think that folks were as well prepared then as hopefully we can be now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the school choice, like you said, it's already starting to blow a hole in the budget. And, there's been just a little bit of data about who exactly is taking advantage of these school choice vouchers. There's not a whole lot about the income, as far as I can tell at this point. And part of that is because, they've only got so many vouchers right now. It's not universal yet. And so they're prioritizing low income folks. But there is data about who was in private school already. And the majority of the people that have taken advantage of the vouchers were already in private school. It's not so far, the vast majority of people who have been taking advantage of this voucher program are not people that are being quote unquote saved from failing public schools. They're people that were already in private schools, not being taken out of the public school system. And so what that means is actually that, they were already there. The public schools were not paying for them. And now money is being siphoned out from the public schools to follow, to go to this private school. And so, it's creating a lot of problems. And, I foresee, even absent really bad economic times, attempts to try to fill that hole from somewhere, and taking it from people's retirements that's definitely one thing that these folks would like to do. And then on top of that, like you said, I mean, the economy is not looking great right now. We just had that February jobs report where we lost 92,000 jobs in 1 month. And for the first time since Trump's taken office, healthcare jobs have declined. We lost jobs in the healthcare sector for the first time. Healthcare was basically healthcare and AI was keeping the economy afloat, and it wasn't and they started losing jobs. That sector started losing jobs last month. So, with wars in the Middle East, bad, and manufacturing jobs have been going by the wayside almost as fast as federal jobs since Trump came into office. So lots of reasons to be concerned about this and about budget downturns. And actually, there's there's also native problems that you kind of alluded to with the way that Alabama collects revenue. That Alabama Arise has actually recently put out their own report, about Alabama's taxation and revenue system that might be relevant. You mentioned that a large part of Alabama's tax revenue comes from sales taxes, and sales taxes are an inherently regressive form of taxation, because when you are a low-income person, every dollar that you make has to be spent, right? And so if every dollar you make is spent, then a lot of that money, except for like your mortgage and stuff, is going to have a sales tax placed on it. And so whereas if you are a higher income person, you don't spend all of the money that you make. You might invest it, or you might put it in a savings account or something. And so you are not as exposed to the sales tax burden. And so Alabama Rise actually found that literally the more you make in Alabama, the less of your income goes to taxation. All the way down the tax brackets, the bottom quintile of people in the state of Alabama pay the most money in tax as a percentage of their income. The top quintile in the state of Alabama pays the least money in tax as a percentage of their income. And when you have a situation like that, it makes it makes revenue even more unstable and more and less resilient when you have economic downturns like it looks like we might be going into.
Yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it, because it's upside down. It's like upside down compared to what most people would imagine, right? It just doesn't make sense intuitively that the poorest folks would be paying the highest percentage of their income on local and state taxes. And it's not just regressive, it's totally inadequate too, because we raise the least amount of revenue. Because once you factor in gaming, lottery, and gambling proceeds alongside taxation, we raise the least amount of revenue of any state in the country. And so, it's really wild to think that if we just raised as much revenue per capita as Arkansas, we would have 1.8 billion or so extra. It's something like that, close to $2 billion extra.
Wow.
It's not like Arkansas is some kind of progressive paradise, right? But if we brought in as much as our southeastern peers, we would have, a couple $1 billion extra at least to invest in public services for the public good. I mean, imagine what that could really do for quality of life in this state. Right. But to expand on your point about the inequity in it, we're the only state that allows you to deduct your full federal income tax payments, right? So a millionaire who has to pay some federal income taxes gets to deduct all of that from their state taxes.
Wow.
Meanwhile, income is taxed at a very, very low threshold, right? Our income tax brackets have not changed since the Great Depression. So the low rates, the middle rates, the high rates, they're all the same from in the 30s. And it's really backwards. It's inadequate. It's regressive. I mean, the FIT deduction, the federal income tax deduction alone would raise like $1.2 billion. That's money that would go into our education trust fund budget, right? And they're talking about maintaining funding for retirees and for active employees' healthcare, right? The PHIP and the state employees' healthcare system costs continue to rise because healthcare costs are going up for everybody, because healthcare is a racket in this country. But hey, if we had an extra $1.3 billion going into the education trust fund budget, we would have a lot of room to grow important programs to keep up with rising costs. I mean, hell, we could have preschool for every 4-year-old in the state. We could have social workers at every low-income school. We could do so much across the state if we had that kind of money. But, instead, we got to make sure we pad some pockets of some rich folks. Property taxes are incredibly low. They're the lowest in the country. And the worst the worst about it is the timberland, because most of that is owned by out-of-state, venture capitalist types.
Mm-hmm.
And they are paying the lowest property taxes on their so-called timberland. And it's draining our budget. I mean, this money would go to our local school systems, to our local and, county governments, roads, bridges, fixing up the old playground, taking the mold out of the ceilings of the school, all those sorts of things that we could do. But no, some investor has to pay, pennies on a dollar for all this, agricultural land or timberland that they owned. It's so there's so many loopholes in Alabama's tax system. It's so inadequate and so regressive. It's so bad that when you look in envy upon Arkansas and Louisiana,
that's bad.
No shade to my brothers and sisters in those states. We appreciate you too, but we know y'all don't really got it going on compared to us either. So,
right.
I just know an extra couple $1 billion could bring a new deal for Alabama. It could go a long way. And I hope, in 2026, the entire state government's up for election, the governor, all the state senators, state representatives. And I think people need to be asking these candidates, where do you stand on these issues? Where do you stand on protecting the state pension system? Will you do that? And will you find ways to find revenue to support the retirees? Because those retirees haven't had a cost of living adjustment since 2007. Right. But that was the year I graduated high school. That was a pretty long time ago. It was almost 20 years ago. That's not acceptable. I mean, they got a $300 bonus 4 years ago. Well, prices have been rising the last 4 years, if anyone's paying attention. And that $300 is long gone. So, they need to be finding revenue sources to support these folks, because, if you're on a fixed income after giving your life to Alabama's communities and children, the least we can do is make sure you can keep up with cost of living. So those are the kind of issues we need to be asking. And how are you going to fill these holes in our budget? How are you going to raise revenue? And are you going to keep taxing poor and working people the most? Are you going to make sure that the wealthy corporations and the wealthiest households actually pay their fair share?
Alabama workers, beware. They're coming for your retirement. We're going to take a break. We're going to be right back with the rest of the program. Stay tuned, folks. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger food drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit NALC.org. Unite Here is also a supporter of the Valley Labor Report. They are a labor union that represents 300,000 working people across Canada and the United States. Their members work in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, distribution, laundry, transportation, and airport industries. You can learn more about Unite Here at unitehere.org.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks, from the bayous of Louisiana to the mountains of Tennessee, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Today on the program, we just talked about Alabama's pensions and what we predict is a coming attack on them. We're going to be spending the rest of the program on Unions 101. So if you'd like to leave us a voicemail, ask us a question about unions, you can do that at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Also, the place that we use to do to do calls and stuff has started accepting texts again. So you can now text us at 844-899-TVLR. You can also send us a written note at tvlr.fm/contact. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to figure out what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, but in particular, you can find us at our website. That's tvlr.fm. We are on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. A huge source of our revenue comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, we got a bunch of cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store. And finally, if you're a member of a union, then you should think about getting your local, your region, or your international to sponsor the show. We could not do this without the support of organized labor. You can reach out to us for more details on that.
Hey, y'all. Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. And we want to welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WGOW, WMSP, Means TV, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out at laborradionetwork.org. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a few diehard unionists who want to amplify the voices of the working class in the American South. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or first-time listener. We appreciate you spending some time with us.
We've got an exciting rest of the show for you. We're going to be doing some Unions 101. We'll be starting with a reminder about what a union even is, and then we'll talk about how unions negotiate contracts. Here you go.
We're going to be talking about, just super basic. What even is a union, right? What is a union? How do they work? Why do people want to join a union? How can you join a union? How can you get involved? How do you bargain a first contract? We're going to be going through all of that kind of stuff, obviously at a very high level. Any of these kind of topics, you could really spend hours on any of them. But just for the 101 level, we'll be able to do that in about 30 minutes. So, starting off with just the bare basics. What is a union, right? It's a very basic question, and it's something that, actually a lot of people are not going to be able to answer if you ask them this question. They're not going to be able to answer with any sort of level of coherence. Sometimes even union members are not going to be able to tell you what a union is because they've never actually thought about it very much. They just know that it's something that they're a part of, that is good for them, that gives them good things, that is the reason that they have, better wages, better benefits, and things like that. But they don't really know actually, logistically what is a union. And so the definition that I think makes the most sense is that a union is just a group of people who work together, who are organizing to make their workplace better. That's really it in a nutshell, right? And I know that, you can have an election and then the government will recognize you, and government recognition goes along with forcing the employer to negotiate with you in good faith. But people were organizing unions before it was legal to organize unions. People were organizing unions when it was expressly illegal to organize unions, right? People were being arrested and murdered by the state for organizing unions, right? And so I have always felt very strongly that it would not be honorable to their memory to say that you are only a union if you win an election and the government recognizes you, right? And you get all of the benefits that come with that. I think that you're a union if you come together and you say you're a union, right? Along with that, when you have people that are coming together to make their workplace better, you get that power of solidarity and mutual aid. Additionally, unions in this country are democratic. They're actually mandatorily democratic by law. There is a certain level of accountability that you have to have. Otherwise, you will get, the government taking action against you, and that's never good. So there are laws surrounding the governance of unions, and there is a certain level of accountability and democracy that unions have to have baked into them. Otherwise, they do run afoul of the law. Unions also give, by virtue of the fact that it is workers coming together and organizing collectively, it gives you power on the job. It gives you power and a collective voice to influence employers and policymakers. We'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. What is a union? It's two or more folks working together to make their workplace better. It is solidarity, it is democracy, it is power, it is mutual aid. That is what a union is, like theoretically, philosophically, right? But then, what is a union if you think about that and you think about, like, what am I going to see when I see a union? Or more accurately, who am I going to see when I see a union? And specifically, what are the kind of people that you see in unions? And what people think when they think about unions is they think about, hard hat wearing construction workers. White guys with hard hats on construction jobs. That's all that they think of when they think of unions, or maybe a coal miner, right? And actually, those people are, there are a lot of folks in unions that that work jobs like that. But that is not the majority of the labor movement. In fact, 46% of union workers are women. 36% of union workers are people of color. And this is a fun one. 42% of union workers have a bachelor's degree or higher. A lot of people think that you don't need a union if you have a bachelor's degree, if you're smart, if you work at a computer, right? They think that that's not necessary, that you don't need a union if you have one of those jobs or if you are educated. And that's just not true. And, it turns out that union workers know that because fully almost half of union workers have a bachelor's degree, right? So it's really, it's really important to, that really goes to show that anybody and everybody can and should be part of a union. 40% of union workers work in education or health services. Actually, the largest union in the country is the teachers union, is a teachers union. There are multiple, but the National Education Association with 3 million members is the largest union in the United States of America. 21% of union workers work in transportation, utilities, or manufacturing. That's where, those are some of the more kind of stereotypical union industries. And you can see with them only occupying 21% of it, they're only part of it, right? They're a big part and they're an important part, but it's only part of it. Anybody can be in a union. If you work for a wage, if you have a boss, then you can join a union, right? That's really the long and short of it. I think that it's worth going through that to kind of dispel some of the myths around who today's union workers are. So with that out of the way, we've gone over philosophically what is a union. And we've gone over, physically, like who are we going to see when we see a union? Now let's go back to some philosophy and let's think about how unions work. I talked about how, unions are about power, but let's dwell on that a little bit more, right? The reason that power from collective action and collective organization is important is because the relationship between you and your employer is not one of equals. Being in a union fixes that imbalance. And it's really intuitive if you think about it, because that if you are unhappy with your working conditions and you leave, basically no matter who you are, no matter how great you are at your job, the workplace is going to be able to go along fine the next day. Maybe it takes a little while to replace you. Maybe they're able to replace you the next day. But if you alone quit your job, that's not a deal breaker for any company, right? If you alone engage in some sort of protest, if you alone write some sort of letter, maybe because your boss just doesn't like conflict, or maybe even your boss is nice, if you, engage in those kinds of actions individually, maybe you'll be able to resolve it, but maybe you won't. And if you are able to resolve it, it's not because, you have that much power. It's just because, by the whim of your boss, right? But if everybody in your workplace got up and said, we are not working until this is fixed, we are not working until this is changed, well, you've stopped production, right? Your workplace simply cannot function if you do not have everybody working. There's a question about where does value come from? Does value come from labor, or does value come from capital, right? And obviously, if you think about that, if you think about what happens when you remove all of the labor from an equation, then, the equation stops. If you remove all the capital from an equation, labor can create more capital, right? If you think about a manufacturing facility and you remove all of the capital-intensive goods, the machines that you need to do those sorts of manufacturing, you can create those machines again through labor, right? But those machines, which are capital, and capital is really just dead labor, those machines cannot create more labor. They have to have labor to create value, right? So labor is the source of all value. When I say labor creates all wealth, I very much mean that labor creates all wealth, okay? Capital does not create wealth. Capital is dead labor. That's all it is. So, back to, how does this power work? If everybody in your workplace protests, if everybody in your workplace stands up and says, we're not working until this problem is fixed, well, then by golly, your boss is going to have to fix the problem. And that's the power that we're talking about. It doesn't even have to escalate all the way to a strike or even to a job action, but just having everybody pushing in one direction, everybody working for the same thing gives you power. It gives you much more power than you would have on your own. And that is what being in a union does. It fixes the imbalance. And that's where our strength comes from. And whether we change conditions through grievances, through job actions, or through political pressure, if we are not together, we don't have power. Right? And that's how unions work. Along those lines of being together, of having power collectively, we have dues. Dues is one of the first things that anti-union folks will try to talk about to try to make people scared of unions. They'll say that unions only want your dues. You'll get the same as you get without a union. You just won't have to pay the dues if you don't unionize. So don't unionize. Dues are bad. Dues are so bad, wouldn't you hate to pay money to a union, et cetera, right? But union dues are very important. And it's not because unions are a business and we're just trying to grow and we want, it's just for the sake of itself, right? Union dues are important because they sustain the organization that is responsible for bringing power to working people. We do not, as workers, we are not individually wealthy, and we cannot, just on a dime, drop thousands of dollars for any reason, right? And so that's why it's important for everybody to pitch in a little bit in timely increments so that we can be able to have these types of resources, right? Because our employers, whether they are private sector employers or whether they're the government, our employers really have more or less kind of unlimited funds that they can do with what they want, particularly as it relates to fighting us. When we think about the popular organizing campaigns that we see in the news a lot, Starbucks and Amazon, and how they pay these union busters, hundreds of dollars an hour to convince us that we don't need a union. Workers don't have those resources, right? And so that's why we have to pool our resources together so that we can have resources that can help us to organize and to educate us. Those funds educate officers. They send us to trainings to help us learn the law, to help us learn how to organize better, to help us learn how to, negotiate some negotiating best practices, grievance best practices, et cetera, et cetera. And they also fund officer salaries or, pizza parties or things like that the union might have. They're very important, and I have, been a union dues payer, obviously, for the better part of a decade now, and I don't regret a cent of it. It's like $21 a pay period. It's like $42 a month. I don't regret 1 cent of it, and if you're a union member, you really shouldn't either. Additionally, budgets are approved democratically by members. People talk about how maybe members don't like the way that their dues money are being spent. Well, unions have budgets that have to be approved by the members. They have treasurer's reports that have to be approved by the members. And so, in my union specifically, it's going to be different. The exact mechanisms are going to be different from union to union. But in my union specifically, every January, the budget committee creates a budget, and then they present that budget to the general meeting, and we painstakingly review that budget. And it is in my opinion, I think people spend way too much time on it. And I would be much more apt to just, approve it and go on. But, look, that's democracy in practice. And we really do. We spend hours on the budget and approving it for the year. And then even after we approve the budget, every single month, we get a treasurer's report at the meeting where we see every red cent that comes in and comes out of our union's bank account, and we approve it or we disapprove it. And if we have questions about charges, then we get to ask questions about it. And we can choose to not approve the treasurer's report and say, hey, you got to go back and fix something. We don't approve that expenditure. That wasn't in the budget. You got to fix this, right? You do not have that kind of power basically in any other organization that you can be a part of. You certainly don't have that kind of power at your job, right? And so that's a really cool thing about unions, about the level of democracy and accountability that unions have. So, we've gone through what a union is and how it works. And so we're going to continue on into bargaining a contract. Okay, so I said that, when you have a union election, and if the union wins the election, then in the United States, there is a requirement on the employer to negotiate a contract in good faith with the union as the bargaining representative of the workers. And so once a union wins an election, or if a contract expires and you're renegotiating the contract, then typically, what you're going to see happen is the union is going to be surveying the members, asking questions about work and the workplace, what you like, what you would like to see change, what kind of raises you think would be appropriate, stuff like that. And then you will have, the union will select the bargaining committee. This is done in different ways in different unions. Some unions appoint the bargaining committee. Some unions elect the bargaining committee. My preference would be elections, but, I'm kind of very pro small. I'm a small d Democrat in that way, right? I like democracy, but not all unions do that. But once you have the negotiating committee will take a look at the member surveys and try to identify some key proposals. And then the union negotiating committee and the company negotiating committee will exchange proposals. They will negotiate. And then they'll try to come to an agreement. Now, sometimes you're not going to be able to come to an agreement, or you're not going to be able to come to an agreement quickly. And so you might have to take a vote to strike. And now this is something that another thing that anti-union types like to do is they like to fearmonger about strikes. What they won't tell you is that you have a say in whether or not you go on strike, right? You have to vote to authorize a strike before the union can call a strike. And that's what happens anytime you see a strike. It's because the members have authorized it, right? So if you don't think that you need to strike over an issue, then you can vote not to strike over an issue. If there's an impasse, then the negotiating committee might request strike authorization. They'll have the vote. Presumably, the vote comes back yes. We empower the negotiating committee to strike if necessary. And then you might see a strike. And that is something that will, put some more pressure on the company to negotiate a contract. Once you get a tentative agreement, the tentative agreement will be shared with the members, and the members will be able to review it and take a look at it, and then they'll be able to vote yay or nay. If the members like the contract, then they'll be able to vote yes and accept it, and then there you go. You have a new contract, and you have new conditions of employment. If you vote no, then it's back to the negotiating table to try to fix whatever it was that the employees, the members of the union, were unhappy with. Some things that you might see in a union contract are, really there's, the sky is the limit. The Chicago Teachers Union is requesting housing for students in their contract negotiations, which is really, really cool. And I hope that they're able to see that. I hope that they're able to get that in this round of contract negotiations. But you're going to see things like wages, insurance, retirement. Union members are basically some of the only people left in the country that have pensions. That's probably worth mentioning. Some health and safety procedures. You have just cause for discipline, which is a really important thing. If you are not in a union workplace, you do not have a collective bargaining agreement, you are an at-will employee. That's anywhere in the country. You're an at-will employee, which means that you can be fired for any reason or no reason at all, which I think is BS, and I think we should outlaw it. I don't think that's a good state of affairs, but nevertheless, that is the state of affairs that exists, unless you have a union contract where and you have a just cause provision in your contract, which will, lay out the procedures for discipline, and presumably you'll have some sort of progressive discipline in there. And you'll have, criteria that you can be punished for or ultimately terminated for. You'll also see, provisions about time off, scheduling, how overtime works. You'll have education and training, fair transfer procedures, staffing provisions, diversity provisions, seniority provisions, things like this. Seniority is another thing that for some reason employers think is a good way to, lambast unions, and it's something that I've never really understood, because seniority seems to me like it is one of the most common sense things that you could have in a contract. Well, some of the reasons that are given for not liking seniority is that, if I work harder than this 65, 70-year-old guy and I produce more, then I should be able to make more money than him, right? Why shouldn't I? And that just doesn't make sense to me. And I think that, if people were to think about it for more than 2 seconds, they would agree. But, if this guy is 67, 70 years old, has been working for this company for 50 years, then no doubt he also had times where he was 20 and working really good and was very, very productive, right? But he sacrificed those years of his life, the best years, most of his waking life. He sacrificed to a company. And so, I think he deserves actually a lot, like a hell of a lot for that sacrifice. And yes, I think that means he should make more money than a 25-year-old who is more productive. He should have a priority over a 25-year-old who is more productive in terms of, reductions in force or layoffs or things like this. Right? You should have seniority should get you a lot, right? I think that makes sense. Now, the important thing about a union contract is that it's negotiated by the union, which is made up of the workers. So if workers in a certain workplace don't agree with me that seniority is an important thing, they could outvote me and not put much weight on seniority. And that's the beauty of democracy, right? If people in some workplace say, I don't care about seniority, I just want to be, compensated for productivity, well, I think that's dumb, but you could put that in your union contract if you wanted, right? It's totally up to you. That's the beauty of democracy and the beauty of a union and what you can do in a union. I think that's great, even if I disagree with it. So now we get to contract enforcement. Okay, so we've bargained a contract, we've got a great contract, we've got seniority, but, now comes enforcement. Because if you don't enforce it, it's just a piece of paper. And so one of the first lines of defense are going to be union stewards. Stewards are trained in, grievance procedures. They're sent off for union trainings to learn about labor law, to learn about, how to do investigations, to, you get all sorts of training as a union steward, or you should. stewards are the ones that are going to file grievances when a contract is violated and hold management to account. And ultimately, the grievance procedure typically ends in like binding arbitration or something like that. So, having stewards and having active stewards and having an active membership who reports to stewards regularly is very important to enforcing the contract. Because, you could theoretically have the best contract in the world, but if you don't make sure, if you don't stop management when they try to violate it, it's just a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything. The bottom line is that without a union, management controls all the decisions. In non-union workplaces, management has the right to set or change each worker's pay, benefits, working conditions at any time for any reason without consultation. They also have the right to fire workers for any reason or no reason. Right? I think that's BS. I think that you shouldn't have to put up with that. And that's why I think that, everybody should join a union. But nevertheless, that's not the state of affairs that we are in right now. So in a union workplace, you have a contract that you have negotiated and that neither you nor management can change on a whim. You have to negotiate changes in the contract. I think that's really beautiful. Now, speaking of enforcing the contract, some people think that unions only help bad workers, right? That's a real misconception, I think. One reason that it's a misconception is that most people who actually come to the union and need help never think they are going to be the ones who need help. Every single person that I have taken through the grievance process to a person has said something along the lines of, I never thought it would be me. Right. I always thought that I worked great. I've always had a great relationship with my supervisor. I always do good work. But, now this issue has risen and I can't seem to find relief. And that's actually the situation that most people who have to come to the union for help find themselves in. In addition to that, unions can only enforce the contract or make change that the membership is behind, right? So management is never going to agree to a contract that does not allow them to discipline or terminate a worker who is really harming production, right? You're just never going to get a contract like that. Management would never agree to it. So anytime that a union gets an employee their job back, they were able to do that because management didn't follow the contract, right? So that's an important thing for people to recognize when they feel like, unions are only helping the bad employees. The union is only able to enforce the contract or make change that the membership is behind, right? Members don't like working with unproductive coworkers, right? That's something that nobody likes, to work with somebody who is not carrying their weight. So if you are, a worker, you want to have somebody next to you that you don't feel like you have to do their job for them. And so they're not even going to ask for a contract that doesn't allow you to discipline workers because they don't want that either. They want, they're going to want a contract where management can discipline and can, build up a productive workforce. Additionally, a lot of times if you show me a bad worker, actually, I'll be able to just show you a worse boss, right? Because management has a job. That job is training and supervision. And a lot of times, if people aren't productive, people aren't able to do the job that they're supposed to, it's because they haven't gotten the adequate training. And so that's an important thing to recognize, I think. So there you go. That is kind of the introduction to unions that I have prepared today.
The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama local workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact April at our training center to start the process at 256-904-1753. No experience is needed. We offer free training, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is our mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by the Communication Workers of America. Learn more at cwa-union.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, better known as the UAW. They are one of the largest and most diverse unions in North America, with members in virtually every sector of the economy. UAW-represented workplaces range from multinational corporations, small manufacturers, and state and local governments, to colleges and universities, hospitals, and private nonprofit organizations. The UAW has more than 400,000 active members and more than 580,000 retired members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. You can learn more about the UAW and join at uaw.org. The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by Labor Notes. Labor Notes is a media and organizing project that has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement since 1979. You can learn more about Labor Notes at labornotes.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Union leaders, do you want a powerful website and mobile app built just for your members? The Union Active system, created by Unions America, makes it easy to share news and documents, send alerts, and keep your members engaged anytime, anywhere. Trusted by thousands of unions, Union Active streamlines communication so you can focus on what matters most, your members. With real-time updates, secure messaging, and custom features built for unions, you'll keep your members informed and engaged 24/7. Get Union Active today. Visit unionactive.com to learn more. Union Active, the ultimate website and communication system for unions.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
One of the problems that I see with education around unions is, again, just that people really do not have any kind of comprehension on even what a union is, and a lot of times, or if they understand what a union is, they don't understand how unions negotiate contracts, right? We hear all of this talk about big labor, about union bosses, and the way that, especially in corporate and right-wing media, want to portray unions is as these far-off institutions that are going to tell you as a worker in Alabama or wherever else you are, these institutions that are far away that you don't have a hand in, they're going to tell you how everything works. They're going to tell you what your contract is going to be. You're going to get no say in it. They're going to tell you to go on strike. You're not going to get a say in it. And so, you know, in addition to this just being a generic kind of educational segment, we want it to be a myth dispelling segment as well. So Adam is actually in the middle of contract negotiations right now, so I figured he would be a good person to talk to about this. Adam, what would be the first thing, either when unions begin contract renegotiations or when unions are bargaining their first contract immediately after winning a union election or being voluntarily recognized as you were at your company? What are some of the first steps that its members take when they are beginning the negotiation process?
Well, I would say one of the first steps would be figuring out your bargaining team, your negotiators who are going to be serving at the table negotiating this agreement. And so typically unions do it differently. Every union has their own method in terms of how someone becomes on the bargaining team and what that looks like. But it is typically a democratic process that in my case, we voted for who we wanted to serve on the bargaining team. And these were our rank and file coworkers who we want to represent us. Depending on the size of the unit, it may vary on how many folks are required per department or per certain types of job classification. You know, in my case, it's a smaller bargaining unit. There's only 14 people, so we have a rather small bargaining team. But, you know, I've seen bargaining teams that are much, much larger and do have that diversity of skill sets because if you're in a larger workplace and you represent all sorts of different types of workers, it's really good to have those different voices reflected because at the end of the day, this contract is going to cover everybody in the bargaining unit, regardless of their job. And so you have to be mindful of that, right? You have to be able to look out not just for yourself if you are on that bargaining team, but for the entire unit, all the workers that you're there representing. Some unions will also include staff or officers, maybe an
attorney.
Potentially. So, you know, again, it just varies on the negotiations, who you're up against in terms of the company, how big of an employer this is. All those vary and factor into it. But, you know, in my case, we have workers from the rank and file who were elected by the rank and file. We also have a staff rep from our union, and we also have an officer from our union. Combined, you know, we have quite a bit of experience and perspectives to bring to the table that's really helpful.
I want to emphasize the importance of typically, now, you know, it is true that not every union is the same, and there are going to be some unions where negotiating committees are primarily appointed positions from the union leadership. But we'll talk about later how even if you don't, as a rank and file member, get to elect your bargaining committee, you can still have influence over the process. But typically, you know, you do see elected positions on the bargaining committee. It is not uncommon. I don't know if it's the majority of bargaining committees. I don't have data on that, but it is a very common thing that you get to elect from the people that you work beside who is going to be on the negotiating committee across the table from management. So these are people that you work on the line beside, works in the cube next to you, drives a truck on the same shift as you, you know, whatever your situation is. These are people who know what it is like to work under the current contract if you're renegotiating a contract, or what it's been like to work before you unionized if you're negotiating your first contract. And I think that's something that is really cool that you do not get if you are in a non-union workplace, right? You don't get to elect people that are going to be negotiating the contract. You don't even get a say. You don't even get a contract. It's all up to management what they do or don't do, and it's all at their discretion. Even if you have a great job and your manager is great and you have good benefits and your working conditions are great, that can all literally be taken away tomorrow at the discretion of your employer without your input, consent, or consultation. Emphasizing that, I think, is really important. And so once we've got the bargaining team either elected or appointed or some combination of the two, and also just a reminder that even if they're appointed positions, the person who appoints them is elected one way or another. Right.
There's democratic accountability at various levels.
Right.
That does vary from union to union, and some are more democratic and some are less. But absolutely, there is input that you have as a union member into this process that you just simply don't have as a non-union worker.
And so once the negotiations committee has been selected or elected, whatever the process is, one of the next things that will happen during these negotiations or before negotiations begin is that the people on the bargaining committee will get training. And in some cases, like a significant amount of training. I know the machinists, for instance, they will send their negotiations committee for 1 to 2 weeks, full-time bargaining preparations, learning about relevant law, learning about relevant case law, studying their contracts, studying other contracts in the industry, studying negotiation techniques, how to behave at the table for, like just the interpersonal, like ways to try to, get the best deal at the table through those kind of rhetorical tricks and things like that. I mean, some unions do more training than others, but because of my experience with the machinists and having been so close to David Story for so long, I know that they get a significant amount of training, and you got at least some training as a member of the bargaining committee at your workplace, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Got training. And I also want to just point out part of the reason our team is the dynamic it is with an officer as well as a staff rep is because it is a first contract. And so maybe holding our hand is putting it a little too strongly, but the union is a little more engaged in directly in ensuring that the team is equipped to pull off a successful first contract, whereas it may be a little bit more driven by the bargaining committee, the rest of the bargaining committee moving forward. So that's something to factor in, but there's absolutely a lot of training that goes into this. Every union does it different, but you have to prepare, you have to do your homework, you have to learn how to do this. It's a variety of skill sets are involved, and it's not something that necessarily comes natural to everybody, or it's not something you necessarily have practice for per se. In my previous union, the National Staff Organization, something that we did was these coordinated bargaining councils where we would meet regionally and compare our contracts. And that's something we would do as part of our training was we would all bust out our contracts and we would have charts where we would chart the gains and the losses per article, right? And look and see, well, where did we make gains or losses in wages? What about, vacation leave? What about retirement contributions, health insurance, all this? Training is a big part of it. And then you're probably about to ask me about how we get input from the membership, which is also a big early stage.
Yeah, that's the next step. So we've got the negotiations committee. They're trained up. They're experts now. They know everything there is to know about negotiations and labor law. Maybe that's putting it too strongly. But after all of that has happened, or even sometimes these things are running on parallel paths, there are multiple things that unions and negotiations committees do to try to get the pulse of the membership, try to figure out what the priorities of the people in the relevant bargaining unit are. And so what are some of those things?
Right. Again, it varies based on the size of the unit. A very small unit, you could have one-on-one conversations with everyone, right? And get a lot of feedback that way. A lot of times bargaining committees do surveys, and they will survey the membership, and that gives you some hard data to work with. That's helpful. I know in our case, we use proposal form or input forms, and folks literally gave their input on Google Docs and sent it to us, and we collected those and analyzed those. So there's various ways that, the bargaining team is going to collect data, collect input from the membership, but that is a really important way to engage as a member. Like, if there are things that bother you, here is a good chance to say something about it. If there are things you want to see improved. It's different with the first contract because we're coming up with everything, right? It's based on our status quo of not having a union, not having a contract, versus if you're already working under a contract, you may have a better idea of what language has been giving you problems, what language you'd like to see changed, because something else is going to be feeding this feedback loop is grievances that you've had over the past few years, over the life of the contract cycle. So that's also feeding your input. So you're getting surveys, you're having one-on-ones, you're doing other forms of input to get feelings and thoughts and opinions and questions and concerns from the membership to drive your negotiations. And then where you already have a contract in place, you're also looking at the grievances that you've been dealing with, because that's also going to drive your negotiations and where you need to put your focus. If there are particular articles or sections of the contract that are continually coming up as controversies in the workplace, there's constantly disputes about the interpretation, that's something you're going to want to address. Typically, the bargaining team, that's how they develop their proposals, is based on that input. That's how they know what to do. That's how they know what to prioritize. right? If 10 members all want a pay raise, but only one member really cares about more vacation, you're going to focus more on the pay raise than the vacation, right? That's just kind of the way that works. And so, there is a lot of feedback loop going in with that process, but that's what really shapes you going into the negotiations. Like, you have your membership input, you have your history of grievances, and so you have some idea of your priorities that you want to tackle.
David mentioned when we discussed this on the program 3 years ago that sometimes among the negotiations committee, the discussions about what to prioritize or, what issue they cared about, sometimes these discussions can get heated, even just among the negotiations committee or the bargaining committee or union members, because, this is your life. It's really kind of a gross state of affairs that we live in a so-called democracy or republic or whatever. We're supposed to have some amount of input over the conditions of our lives, but the place where we spend the majority of our waking lives, at minimum for most of us 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, we don't have any rights. But in union workplaces, you have some amount of say. And so when you're discussing this kind of stuff, you're discussing the conditions under which you're going to spend the majority of your waking life. And so if you have a disagreement, that can be very frustrating. You're like, I want this to happen so that I don't have to deal with this problem for the next 3 years, and you don't agree with me? What the hell? What's going on there? So that can be very frustrating. And so what David said was that, whenever they had these kind of heated discussions or debates or whatever among the committee, they would just take a look at the survey, right? That they would point to the survey, say, look, I understand that you're heated about this, you really want this, but only 3% of the membership agrees with you. We don't have the mandate to go really hard on this issue at the table. And so once you've got a really good pulse of the membership, once you figure out how they feel about something that sometimes unions will do, and, sometimes it's a little different from union to union, but sometimes unions will do a whole proposed contracts. Like, they will just, they'll create a contract on their own that they say, this is what our ideal contract would look like. That theoretically, management could just sign at the bottom, and then on day one, negotiations are over. But, I'm not aware of anything like that happening. But, sometimes they do that, and they're able to kind of make a campaign out of some of the really big issues. Like you said, a lot of times wages and raises are really important to folks. And so they'll highlight the results of the surveys, and they say, based on this, we want in the contract a 35% wage increase over the next 3 or 4 years. And so that's something to basically send back to the membership for one more kind of gut check about, okay, look, we've heard from everybody. The negotiations committee, we've heard from everybody. Here's where we think that you all are. Let us know what you think about it. And then I've even seen some people go a step further to ratify that proposal before the negotiations even start. I've seen some unions do that. They said the negotiations committee creates a proposal, basically an ideal contract. They send it to the membership for approval, and then they take that to the bargaining table with the company.
There's so many different ways you can approach it, but like you said, the feedback is really important. And again, I want to emphasize the membership involvement in that process is really, really important. Is that saying that, if you give your input, it's going to automatically be reflected in the final contract? Obviously not, right? A lot can happen between the moment you give your input on that survey and what actually comes out in a final agreement for you to vote on. But if you're not giving your input, you're not helping your team, and you're not helping yourself either, because if there are issues that are relevant to you, you need to speak up on those, and you need to share those with folks and let folks know how it impacts you. And maybe it impacts others, maybe it doesn't. That's something for us to figure out. But you do need to speak up, and you do need to be involved, and you do need to follow along in this process. And I know we'll talk later about once the negotiations start and providing updates and that sort of thing. But yeah, you need to be engaged throughout the process. Right. Even if you're not on the committee, everybody has a part to play, because the management will also know how involved people are. They will have a sense of like how engaged the membership is with bargaining. That creates leverage on their end sometimes. So, that's something for us to consider.
We have a comment in the chat from Steve. One problem is when the union asks members to submit proposals, but then the members don't know which proposals were actually brought to the table. And, that's one of those issues where we'll be describing kind of a generalized approach that a lot of unions do actually take. But like we were going to say throughout, some unions are going to do things a little bit differently, maybe a little bit more democratically than we're describing, and some a little bit less democratically. But it's also important to remember the mechanisms for accountability and democratic responsibility of the people on these committees or in elected leadership, that members do have the opportunity to say, if you are in a union and you don't like the level of democracy that you're seeing in your negotiations, you can make that known to the negotiations committee directly during negotiations. And you can also agitate for change in future contract negotiations or in future leadership elections to try to see increased involvement and increased participation from the membership during these negotiations. But yeah, it's certainly a problem sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Any need for improvement in your contract negotiations process, whether it's transparency, democracy, input, whatever the situation may be, is an opportunity to organize, an opportunity to engage democratically and try to make things better. A lot of times people get burnout or get jaded and they get upset and they just sort of unplug. And I think that's the wrong approach, because that doesn't fix anything. If you don't like the way the negotiations are going, then say something and speak up and try to change that. Talk to your other members about that. See who else feels the same way. Can you bring a motion to the next meeting, right? Can you put something on the floor? Can you make something happen? So that would be my challenge to folks, is always be thinking how you can make things better and how you can engage democratically with your coworkers, your fellow members, and try to make things better. It is a great responsibility to be on these negotiations. And I think most people who go into it realize that, and it weighs heavy on their heart. And it is a lot of work. It is a ton of work. Even in my situation where I have a very friendly management on the other side of the table, it's still a lot of work, right? To get the language right, to come up with proposals, to keep track of counters and counters to the counters and all that kind of stuff. It is a lot of work. Right. But you do have a responsibility as the membership to hold your folks accountable. So I would say be engaged in the process, and if there are shortcomings, then speak up about that.
And so then once we've got the surveying, taking the pulse of the membership, maybe creating ideal proposals that the membership can see, then we do actually get to the negotiations table. You get to the bargaining table with management. What do some of those first days negotiating with management look like? One of the first things that you negotiate is ground rules, right?
Right, yes. And my understanding is that ground rules are not necessarily something you have to do per se, but it's something that is typically done, and that's going to cover when and where will you meet. Will you meet virtually? Will you meet in person? Will it be at the union hall? Will it be at, the company's spot? Will it be at a neutral location? Those are the sort of things you'll come up with in ground rules. You may also discuss what will be shared coming off of the table, and that can be a tricky situation, what you agree to not talk about, because some unions will enter into really binding confidentiality where almost nothing is shared. Almost no updates can be provided. And then you have other situations that are totally open. There is no real guardrails there in terms of what's shared and what's not. So it can really vary wildly. And those ground rules are part of the bigger strategy and part of the bigger game that you're playing. Sometimes you may get frustrated with your team to say, well, why did you agree to this in ground rules? Well, maybe there was a reason, because we were building goodwill to win on the first proposal, right? There's all sorts of reasons why you would agree to something in the moment to potentially move things forward elsewhere, because, it is a give and take process. You're not going to get everything that you want, more than likely, but you should also not lose on everything either. Right. For decades, a lot of our unions were really just managing concessions. And we're coming into these contracts with the expectation of concessions and walked away with concessions. And that's just not a long-term recipe for success, obviously. The extent to which you can win things versus lose things is very dynamic and based on the employer and the situation you're in and the union strength and the economy and all that. But yeah, those are all different things that you're balancing. So the ground rules is something early. And then at that point, you're going to start actually passing proposals. My assumption would be that in most cases, the union's going to be passing more than management will be. That depends, I guess, on your situation, but just to generalize a little bit, management will certainly propose something called management rights. That will certainly get passed by management, but everything else is often going to be up to you on the union side to try to make gains and make progress. And typically you'll have proposals or articles that are based on certain categories of your employment in terms of wages, healthcare benefits, retirement benefits, vacation days, sick leave. You'll tackle these different topics and just go back and forth, passing language back and forth, refining it, trying to find some language that you can agree to.
And then after you're passing proposals back and forth, and you mentioned that, one of the ground rules that you might negotiate at the beginning, that some unions do negotiate, are these really binding NDAs, non-disclosure agreements that really do limit the amount of updates that you can provide to your members about how negotiations are going. I think you and I obviously favor less restrictive NDAs if we're going to sign them at all. I think I would probably lean towards not signing an NDA at all, especially with your members. Maybe you can kind of play it by ear whether or not you feel like it's important to retain the right to talk to the media. That's maybe a little bit more tricky, but particularly being able to update your members on negotiations, I think is important. And I think, members appreciate that kind of stuff, those updates and being kept in the loop. But as you're negotiating, passing proposals back and forth, if there's not anything else during that process that you feel like is important to emphasize, what are some of the things that happen towards the end of negotiations?
Well, I can only speak from my experiences. What we have been doing is or at least right now in the contract negotiations I'm in, we'll reach a TA on certain proposals, a tentative agreement on certain proposals. And that's not to say that we can't change our mind later. We can, but for the moment, both sides have agreed to language on these proposals. And eventually, hopefully, we get to that point where we have a TA or tentative agreement on everything, on all the proposals that are necessary for the contract, or all the articles in your existing contract, or that needs to be added to the contract. And once you have that tentative agreement, as in both sides have informally agreed, the negotiations team as well as the management's negotiations team have both signed off on it. At that point, the negotiations team will have to have a meeting of itself and discuss how they handle that. In some unions, the bargaining team will officially recommend passage. In some, they will just present it without a real judgment call. So that's going to vary. Even if your bargaining team recommends that you do or don't vote down an agreement, sometimes the bargaining team present you an agreement that they themselves don't want you to vote for. That happens. Maybe it was the best deal they could get out of the negotiations, but it's still not really a good deal. They want the membership to send them back, or they want the membership to threaten a strike. Whatever the situation may be, you as the member typically are going to have the ultimate decision, because once there is a tentative agreement in full available, often the member then has a direct vote on whether to ratify it and make it an official contract approved by both sides.
That's important to emphasize, that the bargaining committee really ultimately does not have the final say in what the contract is. They will send it back to the members for a ratification vote. As they send it back, they can opt to recommend ratification. They can opt not to say anything about whether they recommend or not. And they can also say, here's the best thing we could have gotten at the bargaining table without a strike. We don't recommend this. We recommend you vote against it and potentially recommend you strike. And that's the next thing. So let's say that you get a tentative agreement. The bargaining committee says you shouldn't ratify it. The membership doesn't ratify it. And then either at this point, or a lot of times actually before negotiations even start, you will hold a strike authorization vote, right? Which will empower the bargaining committee to, when they feel like is necessary, call a strike. If they feel like the company is not bargaining in good faith, or they're not moving as much as they should, a strike authorization vote, if passed, will allow the bargaining committee to call a strike. And so that might happen after you reject a tentative agreement. A lot of unions do it even before the negotiations begin. But if you have a failed tentative agreement and a passed strike authorization vote, then at that point, you could potentially see the union threaten to strike.
That's right. You could also see both sides scramble to go back to the table and try to work out a deal. And maybe management suddenly sees the writing on the wall that a strike is looming and they change their posture. So that's often a possibility. And then it's worth pointing out, in some sectors, you can't strike legally, right? In some sectors, it may be that, or in some situations, it may be that it has to go to arbitration, perhaps. But what you're describing is probably the typical private sector situation. So yeah, either it's going to be ratified by the membership, and in which case, woohoo, you got a new contract, and hopefully it was a good one. Or it's rejected. At that point, a strike is on the table. Typically, a strike authorization vote may take a bigger majority of your members to vote for it. So that's something to monitor, is what is the vote tally. When you see a union and they have like a 95, 97, 98% strike authorization vote heading into negotiations, that is a very strong sign. That is a strong symbol of unity, and it shows that not only are folks unified, that they're willing to take action if they can't get a good deal at the table. So that's obviously something you want to see for a lot of negotiation teams. You'd love to see that kind of momentum heading into bargaining.
If you authorize a strike or you get an agreement, presumably, hopefully, and most of the time, you do get to a contract ratification. You're right to point out that in many sectors, a strike is technically legally not on the table, although we have seen situations in which workers went on strike even though it's technically illegal. Workers in West Virginia and teachers in West Virginia, Massachusetts, places like this have gone on strike and won despite it technically being illegal. The postal workers went on a strike in 1970 despite it technically being illegal, and they were able to win big things. The only illegal strike is one that you lose, as Patco actually said. They're the ones that said that.
They would know it.
Yeah, they would know it. But once you have ratified a contract and finished negotiating and the contract is in place and enforced, the last thing that's important to talk about, I think, under how do unions negotiate contracts is contract enforcement. We won't spend very long on it, but, I think it's important to emphasize the fact that you do have to, as a union, enforce the contract. Otherwise, it's meaningless, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you don't enforce it, these words don't enforce themselves, right? And certainly if it's something that is advantageous to your members, management is not going to be prone to just go out and do it just because it's in the contract. You have to breathe life into the words of the contract. You have to enforce it day to day. That's going to be the role of your stewards and the role of your rank and file members, educating them on the contract so that they know the benefits in the contract, they know their rights under the contract. That's really important. You have to hold management accountable. You have to be able to show them the language and force them to agree to it and to abide by it. Sometimes that requires filing grievances. And again, that goes back to where we started, because that'll be the beginning of your feedback loop for the next contract. Because if you have a new contract in place and then you start running into issues where maybe the language was a little unclear or the management keeps crossing the line on something, well, that may be where you need to focus some energy in the next negotiations, but certainly in the meantime be filing grievances in between. But yeah, the contracts don't enforce themselves. So, and that's something that even a really good contract, if you're not enforcing it, is not going to live up to its potential. You can get some really great language at the table, but if your stewards are falling asleep at the wheel and not really doing what they're supposed to do, and if members aren't really educated on the contract and enforcing those rights, it's just words on paper.
And we're actually seeing a high-profile example of that with the UAW in Stellantis, where the UAW is threatening a nationwide strike if they don't follow the contract at the end of the grievance procedure, which the UAW has been able to negotiate that at the end of the grievance procedure, at least on this one particular issue, that is decisions that the company makes related to product decisions and investments and things like this, they negotiated the ability to strike
over those kinds of things, which is not something that a lot of unions have during the contract. A lot of unions give away totally the ability to strike during the contract term, but the UAW was very dogged about including that right in the contract over product decisions and investment and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that pretty well covers it.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
This is Overtime, a production of the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio and online news outfit in the South, coming to you from the heart of the Tennessee Valley in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama. We are run by working people and for working people in the South and all over the country. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We appreciate you spending some time with us today. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail or send us a text, you can do that at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send us a written note at tvlr.fm/contact. Adam, I've got a clip that we're going to react to today, and I had you watch it beforehand, and I think it gave you a little bit of psychic damage.
It did. It brought my energy down. It made me feel really bad about life and kind of the way of the world. And just, I felt really bad about the way things have turned out, in 2026. It's not
been a good year. Not a good year. Yeah. So, so Sean O'Brien was on NewsNation with we could even probably call her a friend of the show. She's been on the program before. Batya Ungar.
A fan of the show, I'm sure.
A fan of she did say something like that she appreciated the show and the work that we do, and she
must respect our hustle. I mean, she respects that we are out here doing this thing.
That's right.
She's out there doing whatever she is, whatever you call that.
Yeah. So, so friend of the show, Batya Ungar Sargon, going on to bigger and better things, having her own NewsNation show. She had on Teamsters President Sean O'Brien to talk about why he was sitting behind Mark Wayne Mullen as Mark Wayne Mullen was being confirmed for during his confirmation hearings for DHS secretary. We're not going to react to that part of the conversation just because Adam hasn't even seen that part of the conversation, but it did psychic damage to me, and I feel like my resilience to this sort of psychic damage is maybe a little bit higher. I get a little I can laugh about it maybe a little bit more. Adam just gets upset. So we're not going to react to that because it's just kind of embarrassing a little bit, especially because Sean O'Brien's got this his his whole shtick is I'm a big, tough, blue collar union guy, right? I mean, that's not my shtick, right? We've all got shticks. That's not mine. I don't have the same imposing presence that Sean O'Brien or Markwayne Mullin do. And that's like such a big part of their shtick, is that they're big, tough men, and they're physical, and they're willing to get physical and stuff. And so that kind of they're
willing to go on secret missions. One of them is, at least I've heard.
That's right. Secret missions that nobody knows. So secret that the CIA doesn't know about it, is my understanding. I
mean, that's pretty secret. Like, I'll give him that. Like,
yeah,
he was so deep undercover. Like, people still don't know. They still we don't know. Is he playing us? He's still on the op for sure. I don't know.
Yeah. Talking about Markwayne Mullin, for people who don't know about that, supposedly Markwayne Mullin claims to have been, as a contractor, not as an official employee of the CIA, but as some kind of contractor, on a mission so secret that people who have been subsequently asked about the secret mission have no record of it. Is kind of my... that's my understanding of the, I haven't looked too much into it because I already don't like Markwayne Mullin, so I don't need to know that he's a spook to not like him, or that he wants to be a spook and is not actually a spook. but and so it reached their big manly kind of show kind of reached its climax in a purported willingness to fight on the Senate floor, and subsequent to that, they have kissed and made up. And it's just really been embarrassing to watch this whole thing because, you watch both of their interviews, and Markwayne Mullin has not conceded anything to Sean O'Brien. He has not apologized to Sean O'Brien, and he is very clear when he talks about it to make sure that people know Sean O'Brien came to him to apologize to him for his behavior. And now, look, if we want to apologize, both of them have reason to apologize for their behavior because they were both acting a little bit like children. But if you're going to do it, do it. Like, so Sean O'Brien went to him to apologize and make nice. And since then, he has conceded on Markwayne Mullin being a good senator and being a good guy and all of this. Markwayne now, he says, oh, Sean O'Brien's a great guy, but he's never conceded on Sean O'Brien's, job as a leader or the effectiveness of unions generally, or any sort of real concession. It's always O'Brien is the one conceding. And so, I don't know, spending too much more time than that, thinking about it is a bummer because I was a big Sean O'Brien fan. And so seeing him kind of, prostrate himself in front of Markwayne Mullin is, it's one thing prostrating yourself in front of the president of the United States, because at least you can get a little bit more maybe out of the beneficence of the president of the United States than you can one senator from Oklahoma who is stridently, ideologically anti-union. Why he's doing this whole thing is kind of a mystery to me. But so didn't want to react to that, but for people that want to see the rest of the clip, it's out there. I wanted to react to Batya asking him, what has he gotten for being so nice to the president, Donald Trump? And, this is something that we have been critical of him, over the past year, critical of his relationship with the president, even as, to the, as we've been criticized for, still, kind of being clear that probably he was the right choice in the Teamsters election. And probably he's done some good things as the president of the Teamsters. And there's been some good stuff come about during his tenure as president of the Teamsters, but strictly politically. It's kind of where our analysis is. We are not happy with some of the political decisions that he's been making. But here was his chance to kind of maybe prove the naysayers and us wrong, right? Maybe there's something really, really good that he's gotten for his prostration to the president of the United States. And so I was like, when she asked that question, I was like, I want to know the answer to this. So he answers it. Let's see what he has to say.
You buck the trend among Democrats, among union leadership, and insisted that you had a right to go address the Republican National Convention. You spoke there, you gave a barn burner of a speech.
I want to pause that. You know, you buck the there's just so much, Adam, we were talking about about how much that needs to be contested as we react to this. You bucked the trend and said that you had a right to give a speech at the RNC. You know, I mean, there's probably a lot of other union leaders that would give a speech at the RNC if they got the invitation. It's just that they're not going to get that invitation because the people who arrange the speeches at the RNC don't want to hear real good union leader speeches, and they also politically don't like unions a lot, right? So, you know, that's just, I'm sure that there's a lot of union leaders that if they got that invitation would have spoken at the RNC, but they didn't get that invitation because they did not anticipate that the other union leaders would have as nice of a speech for Republicans and Donald Trump as Sean O'Brien did. It's the same reason that the DNC, I think, in error, it was an error for the DNC not to allow Sean O'Brien to speak. But, you know, for the same reason the DNC didn't want Sean O'Brien to speak, because by that time he had already been playing footsie with Donald Trump. And so they were like, we're not interested in that. We've got lots of other unions that are not being weird with the Republicans. And so we'll, you know, the union perspective was represented. Whatever you think about the DNC, the union perspective was represented at the DNC in a way that it was not at the RNC. And so I'm sure there's lots of union leaders that would have been willing to speak at the RNC if they had been given the opportunity. That's a weird thing to say, I think.
I don't know. I think he had to fight for his right to party. And so, you know, he was being a rebel by exercising that right to speak at the RNC. I like the way she framed that. Yeah, that's very dramatic.
It's a very dramatic framing. But you know, to the extent that framing, you know, represents reality, you know, we support it. We support Sean O'Brien speaking at the RNC. It's not a big deal. And would that more union leaders had the invitation to speak at the RNC.
You've gotten a lot in response for that. You got a seat at the table with.
Now it's great that she just asserts you've gotten a lot in, you know, as a result of your speech at the RNC. You've got so much stuff. And so here she starts to list off the things that he has apparently gotten. Let's see what she says.
For that, you got a seat at the table with the Trump administration.
A seat at the table. Okay. I mean, you know, that's something,
and tell
I suppose.
us a little bit about what you've been able to achieve for your rank and file as a result of that leadership.
All right, so here we go. She says, you've got a seat at the table and you've got so much other stuff above and beyond the seat. So here, let's listen to Sean O'Brien tell us what he got.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no secret that we made a bold move. That move was based upon, you know, the member-to-member interaction that myself and my team did 2 years prior to the election, and in talking to our members and polling our members and being transparent with our members. And, you know, 65% of our members were voting Republican, 35% were voting either Democrat or independently. So, you know, we've got an obligation to represent everybody's interest. And
it's worth noting that, you know, I've had conflicting reports from Teamsters on the ground about, you know, is that an accurate representation of their work site? You know, maybe, maybe not. But that was from one poll that was not, you know, it was not scientifically conducted. It was, you know, people that responded to a QR code in the Teamsters quarterly magazine. That's where that number comes from. It was not a scientifically done poll of the Teamsters membership. It was, you know, Teamsters had the opportunity to, you know, scan a QR code and vote. Who are you going to vote for? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? And supposedly 65% of the people that responded to that QR code said that they were going to vote for Trump. But, you know, the validity of that poll aside, no joint council of the Teamsters endorsed Trump, whereas joint councils representing the vast majority of Teamsters membership did vote to endorse Donald Trump. So the Teamsters International did not endorse, joint councils representing a vast majority of the Teamsters membership voted to endorse Harris. And so even though the International did not endorse neither Trump nor Harris, bodies representing the vast majority of Teamsters did, actually. And the joint councils, being a layer below the International, are actually closer to the membership, right? And so, the members have more of an opportunity to remove the folks at that level than they do, the international level. It's easier to, because they're closer to you, right? So, the degree to which that number accurately reflects reality is kind of contested, I think.
Well, like we were talking about with the pensions, you just pick the numbers that you want to hear sometimes. And that's what I suspect is that, it's the poll that they want.
Yeah. Well, and you can't read this chyron very well because our faces are obscuring it, but it says union workers shift votes from Democrats. That's just not true. That did not happen in 2024. Actually, union members voted for Kamala Harris in a higher proportion in 2024 than they did for Biden in 2020. If all workers voted the same way that union workers did in 2024, Harris would have won, and she would have had a majority in the Senate. It's
whether you like that or not, it is what
exactly.
it is.
Right. Yeah. No comment on how good that is, right? But that's just as a factual matter, union workers did not shift votes from Democrats. That is just not true.
We made a decision out of the leadership team, which I stand by, to not endorse a presidential candidate. But more importantly,
and just for the record, we don't have a problem with him not endorsing a presidential candidate. Not a big deal.
We wanted a seat at that table regardless of who was going to be there, because we want to help shape labor policy in this country. We want to help be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And, have we agreed with everything that's gone on? Absolutely not. I don't think anybody would agree with every single decision, but
I also agree with, it's great to be at the table no matter who wins, and unions should and do have that policy really all over the country. Most unions in most places are willing to talk with most politicians. The barrier comes from the politicians, not the unions, most of the time. And there was something else that he said that I wanted to respond to that I forgot. Let's see if I can remember it.
Absolutely not. I don't think anybody would agree with every single decision.
Oh, yeah. I don't agree with every single decision. Not going to tell us what he disagrees with, though.
But we have the ability to have dialogue. I speak to the president often, not just about Teamster issues, but about American issues. And it's been great for our members. Our members in the railroad, we have 100,000 members that work in the drive the trains and also fix and maintain tracks. They've implemented policies that are going to protect jobs in the rail industry and also mandate, safety measures that are going to protect 100,000 members.
Okay. So I tried to look this up. Implement measures to protect jobs in the rail industry. I don't know what he's talking about. And
I don't know what he's talking about either.
I don't know what he's talking about. I follow union news pretty closely, but not like rail news specifically. If they're like rail Teamsters, let me know. 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. What policies has the Trump administration put forward to protect rail jobs? I'm not aware of it. What I am aware of is actually a huge merger that could go through that the Trump administration has not said anything in opposition to it between Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern, which would, in all likelihood, end up killing jobs because that's just what happens when these big corporations merge. With respect to protecting rail jobs, with respect to the abundance of rail jobs or lack thereof, that's the only thing that I can think of that's really affecting the number of rail workers in the policy arena. And then on the safety issue, again, I do not know what policies he's talking about. And I don't know. I'm not a railroad worker. Let me know. But I don't know what he's talking about, other than potentially the fact that that J.D. Vance and probably Trump has endorsed legislation in the Senate that would mandate 2-person crews on the rails, which is good and fine, but Democrats support that too. And so it's not like a uniquely, you did not get that because you spoke at the RNC and have been so, friendly with the Trump administration. That's just not coming about because of those actions. That was already in the works, and and it also has not passed yet. So it's not. So kind of leaves a lot to be desired. And separately from the rails, but while I'm thinking about mergers, the administration looks poised to allow Warner Brothers and Paramount to merge over the objections of the Teamsters. The Teamsters have come out in opposition to this merger. It does not seem like their voices are being heard here, despite the fact that they think this is going to kill jobs.
So they've done some great work there. We have the opportunity. We've been working with the Labor Department, OSHA, all on policy that are going to protect American workers. And
we've been working with the Labor Department and OSHA on policies to protect the American worker. No policies implemented. It actually, what we have seen at the Labor Department has been just vast incompetence, treachery, probably. It looks like people have been sexually harassing Labor Department employees, that are now barred from Labor Department property because of those allegations of sexual harassment from the Labor Secretary's husband, as in the husband is alleged to have sexually harassed people. Mismanagement, political partisanship in the hiring process. We talked about the other couple of weeks ago how they're trying to hire legal interns, and they said explicitly GPA is not a strong factor, and you must support the president's agenda. And one of the questions is, did you vote for President Trump? Right? I mean, that's a crazy thing to ask for. They have gutted staff at OSHA. OSHA is not as effective as it was only 18 months ago. And OSHA was already severely underfunded. We have half of the inspectors that we did in the 80s. Nothing has gotten better at the Labor Department or at OSHA. And yet and that's the thing that he's bragging about, right? He's bragging about his engagement with OSHA and the Labor Department, despite the fact that demonstrably OSHA and the Labor Department are less equipped and are doing less protecting of the American worker. They are less equipped to protect the American worker, and they are protecting the American worker less than they were only 18 months ago.
Supported bringing manufacturing back to the United States, which is going to create middle-class jobs. And
so, I mean, we just talked about this earlier in the program. Manufacturing jobs have declined under the second Trump administration at basically the same rate as federal government jobs. Let's remember the Trump administration had a whole program to eviscerate federal employment, and there has been almost an equivalent number of job losses in blue-collar manufacturing sectors as there was in the sector where that was the explicit policy goal. How can you be mentioning that?
Look, I can't speak for any other union leaders, but my best interest is what's in the best interest of my members.
Mm-hmm. The tariffs and the mass deportations are the two things that I hear most from working class Americans that make them feel represented by this administration. Tell us what you're hoping to see from DHS under a Mark Wayne Mullen administration.
I mean, for what it's worth, the mass deportation stuff is not popular.
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't know how many working class folks she really talks to, but
yeah,
I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing that mass deportation and tariffs makes me feel really represented in Washington, D.C.
Right.
I can think of a lot of folks who don't feel very represented right now, in part because of those things, but certainly, that's interesting framing. I thought that the Teamsters probably had immigrant members. So I'm curious how he will respond.
On that, not only do the Teamsters have immigrant members, they very much do, but ICE showed up to a picket line intimidating and making fun of immigrant workers who were striking.
Well, I think first and foremost, the safety of this country is paramount, and we need to have safe borders. We need to have people that come here legally to go through the process with intention of becoming good Americans. We can't allow people to cross these borders to traffic children, to sell drugs, and commit violent crimes. And so safety and securing the borders have to be paramount. Also, I think what's just as important is the credibility. There's no doubt that the system is broken. And I think Mark Wayne Mullen, and he testified at the hearing, which I was at, he said, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm a hard worker, and I will figure it out. I'll find solutions to the problem. And I think that's all you can ask for. Everybody's going to have their preconceived notions. Everybody's going to be critical. But at the end of the day, we are in the greatest country in the world, and we've got to protect it with everything we got. I think Mark Wayne Mullen is the right man for the job.
Sean
and
O'Brien.
I'd still beat him in a wrestling match.
Indeed, that is what we heard from Senator Hawley, said during the hearing that he would have put his money on you. Sean O'Brien, one of my personal heroes, a great patriot, a great American. God bless and protect you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Bacha. An honor and a privilege. Thank you.
All right. Maybe we got a little bit of psychic damage from that, but
I did. I know I did. Yeah, it ended really poorly, I thought. Pretty gross. Pretty gross, I would say. I mean, really, that's all we can ask for. He's going to be a hard worker, you know. So
yeah,
I guess that's the
all
best
that
we can
matters.
ask for.
When you want somebody leading, the largest armed forces in the world aside from the American military. As long as he gives it his best shot.
Yeah. I mean, we could ask for him to stop kidnapping people, but instead we're just going to ask that he works hard at his mission.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just crazy.
I think it's pretty embarrassing. I think it's really embarrassing because you're a representative of the labor movement. And we're supposed to be about solidarity. We're supposed to say, an injury to one is an injury to all. Well, evidently not to Sean O'Brien.
Well, we got a couple of good old union education clips for you. These are a couple of clips that we recorded a while back with some Labor Notes folks on how to beat apathy in a union campaign and how to form your organizing committee in a union campaign. So we're going to play those for you, and then we'll be out. We'll be back next week. I think that we're going to be able to talk to Lori Wallach about trade again, get an update from her, and we got some other really exciting interviews for you. So so make sure you come back next week, and here are those clips, interviews with Labor Notes. We are joined by Keith Brower Brown, labor and climate organizer with Labor Notes, and Courtney Smith, staff organizer for Labor Notes, to teach you how to do unions better. Thank you, Courtney and Keith. Appreciate y'all taking the time to talk to us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Really exciting to have you. Tomorrow we're going to be, people will be hearing this significantly later, but tomorrow in the present, as we're recording this, we will be down in Birmingham at the Troublemakers School, and we're going to be going through a couple of the workshops that attendees of the Troublemaker School in Birmingham are going to be going through with y'all and some other Alabama unionists leading the workshops down in Birmingham. And so what we wanted to do, for the people who are not going to be able to go in person, we wanted to try to bring some of the magic of Labor Notes right onto your computer screens. So really excited for the conversation. The first workshop that we wanted to talk through is what they call beating apathy. one of the problems that we have in the labor movement is, and really in a lot of kind of volunteer spaces, if you talk to anybody, somebody who's active in their church, somebody who's active in their fraternity, somebody, any kind of thing like that, you're going to hear a very similar complaint among the people who are leading the organization, and that is that too few people are doing too much of the work. So, we'll start with you, Keith. Can you talk to us about how does it happen that you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people doing the work of such a big organization as a local union that might represent 100 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 1,000 people? How does it happen that you have a handful of folks doing that work, and what happens when that is the case?
This makes me think right away about a business manager of a big IBW local out in the Central Valley in California who I've talked to over the years, who, not a bad guy, but he has this mindset of like organizing work, bringing new people into the union. That's not members' work, because I have the knowledge of how to do this. I don't want other people to mess it up and make new problems that then I'll have to clean up. So there's this kind of mentality of protecting the union that a lot of union officers get into this mindset sometimes of there's legal risks, there's financial risks. If we rock the boat in the wrong way, so we got to hold tight onto the work of the union. And then there's the problem of that reproduces a sense of membership. That's not our work, So it's not my job to step up and organize my sibling out on the job site who's not in the union yet. So we start the workshops by asking, this workshop, Beating Apathy, starts with asking, raise your hand if the work of your union is equally shared among all the members. Nobody ever raises their hand to that question.
Right.
It's a real problem.
Yeah, and we usually, the way we ask that question is by doing a scale. So, we'll ask, one end on the scale is raise your hand if majority of the members do majority of the work. That's on the 5 scale. And when we're in person, we have people get up and move to different areas of the room. So you have that on one end of the scale, and then on the other end is only a few people doing the majority of the work. And what you see is that most people are on this other end of the spectrum, where it's a few people doing the majority of the work and people are burnt out.
Right. And, there's something of almost like a doom loop when you get into a situation where you have one person doing all of the work, because then that, centralizes all of the knowledge into this one person, and it makes it so that you can't have other people doing the work. And so you can create a situation by, you can have this one task where you as a local union president can say, it would just be easier for me this one time to do this grievance myself. I know how the process works. I know the member, I know the supervisor, I know the problem. I can get a resolution that everybody's going to be happy with in a week. And for somebody else that hasn't done it, it's going to take them forever. They're going to have to learn the whole thing. I'm just going to do it. It's just going to be easier for everybody if I do it. But then if you do it, you're robbing somebody of their ability to learn to do that in the future, and you are robbing yourself of the opportunity to have an engaged membership in the future, and you are forcing yourself to do it in the future, right? And that's I would imagine that is kind of really the genesis of a lot of this kind of, a lot of the centralization of knowledge and so many people doing so much of the work. You have people who care and who have their hearts in the right place genuinely, and they know how they think things should be done, how they want things to be done, and so they want to go ahead and do it, and they want to because they think that's going to be the best, but that's not exactly the best, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it just reinforces itself, right? This bureaucratization of union work creates this cycle where one person is doing it all, and membership looks at the union as a third party kind of service model, where they can go to their union if they have an issue and they'll take care of it. We don't have to think about it. So it just creates this, never-ending cycle of one person doing the work or a couple of people doing the work, and then they get burnt out, and then they bring in, new folks who do the work for a few years until they're burnt out, and it just is this, cycle over and over again. So we really asked this question to try to ground people in their own experience of how things are being done, and getting them to think through and come to their own conclusion for why that's not working for them.
And so, the situation of like even people who are in and who are kind of replicating that situation, who are, doing all the grievances themselves and all this, they recognize after they're in it, like, oh, like this is not great, right? Like this is a less than ideal situation for me and my members and my union. And, Labor Notes has this visualization tool to help us think about, to help us visualize this situation and maybe start thinking about how to fix it. Can you explain this tool for us?
We're aiming for the bullseye is what this part of the workshop is called. So the heart of the bullseye is the core of union activists. This isn't necessarily who's elected to the president position or whatever. It's who is constantly talking to people about building the union, trying to strategize, trying to build a stronger union together. A lot of people listening, probably in that core or close. The next layer out is activists. So this is the next ring of the bullseye, are activists. So these are people who are consistently showing up, being a part of planning. And the thing that really separates them out and the rest is that they're bringing new people into action. They're talking to their coworkers to get them involved. Next, after that, you got a third layer, the supporters. So these are coworkers who you can count on to show up when there's a big action, sign a petition. They're people you trust to support the union. Next layer out is kind of the biggest one we talk about in this workshop in a lot of ways, disengaged. It's the huge bulk of coworkers who are not plugging in to building the union together yet, who, maybe aren't super anti-union, but they're not doing much to build it. And then beyond that, there's, on the outside of the bullseye, there's hostile, coworkers who are anti-union for whatever reason. We generally say that not worth a ton of time, focus there. We're focusing on bringing in disengaged members to become supporters to become activists who are recruiting more people to be active, and then building your core with new people, making it much bigger so it's not just a few people holding on to this work.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things that we try to press on this point is that it's a static thing. It's not, or it's dynamic. It's not static, so it changes, right? So we use the bullseye as a way to conceptualize like where members fall on the rings. And when you're having one-on-one conversations, which we get into later in this workshop, identifying where they fall into the ring and what is that next ask that you can get them to sign on to get them into a supporter ring or the activist ring, sort of. So it's in constant flux, right? And not thinking that everybody needs to be fully engaged at all times, and just identifying what is the ask, what is the thing that we can get someone to say yes to.
And so when you explain the bullseye, and you've got the big, usually a big picture at the front of the room, where do people usually kind of perceive their union, like the bulk of their membership on this graph? You've got the core in the center, you've got the activists, the supporters, the disengaged, and the hostile. Like, what is kind of the percentage breakdown that people have at each of these layers typically that you see in your workshops?
That's a great
Depends
question.
on the union, I would say. I think, like in a teachers union, sometimes there's more people active. Like if people are in a concentrated workplace and they have like some history of organizing together, especially with striking or other sorts of like mass participation kind of direct action, there'll be more people who are supporters, but maybe not really like activists or core. I'd say the most common answers we get though is there's a lot of disengaged people in my union, and like a really small core, and maybe twice as many activists and a few more supporters.
Yeah, I think the most important question that we ask with this visualization is like, once you've identified where people fall at on the bullseye, what do you think how the boss sees the union? If this is kind of the layout that we have, or the amount of support that you have, if there's 5 people that's in the core and then the rest are all disengaged, then how does your boss view your power?
Right. And that's, there's a direct relationship basically between where your members are on this graph, like how many people are in the core, how many people are activists, how many people are supporters, and how many people are disengaged, and kind of the power that you have, right? Because if the boss is seeing that, every single grievance, it's Johnny that's filing the grievance. No matter who it is, no matter what department it's in, no matter what the issue is, Johnny is the one writing the grievance, and we don't see any other co-signers on it. If a lot of unions will have like Red Shirt Wednesdays or something, and if you only have like 3 or 4 people wearing the shirt, then you are not the only one that sees that, right? Your boss sees that, and that makes it that much more difficult to kind of have that legitimacy that you need as a union when you say in grievance proceedings or in bargaining or to the media, we represent 1,000 workers at such and such workplace. We are 1,000 workers. Like, are you really?
Yeah.
Does the boss think you are?
Yeah.
You gotta, and so having more of your members closer and closer to the bullseye is going to be the thing that actually gives you that legitimacy and gives you that power. So with that as, the bullseye as the thing, as like the foundation of this training, you ask people to think about how problems are normally solved in their union. So what are some common sets of problems and solutions that you hear when you do this workshop?
It ranges all over the board because bosses throw a lot of problems at us at work, it turns out. But late pay or not getting paid at all for overtime, safety issues on the job, not having the right protective equipment, or like being told to do something at unsafe speed. We get, all sorts of problems, but the answers that we hear consistently and what we kind of expect to hear in this workshop is grievances are a main way we try and fight these problems. We file a grievance, or bargaining, that we're gonna, save this for our next contract bargaining session, and we're gonna make sure we get something then. And we, think that these are obviously important wins of the union movement, to get some kind of grievance process, to get contracts at all. Like, that's a step up from nothing.
Right.
But we can't rest on only that, because those are, in most unions, something that just a few people takes care of. And they can be dragged out indefinitely by the boss in a lot of cases. You can have a grievance languish for 5 years with no real change in your day-to-day life. So we then try and steer towards like what would get results on the shop floor in the near term, in the now.
Well, just to add to that, I think one of the other things that we try to kind of highlight with just relying on the grievance procedure as a way to solve problems is that it's invisible to most members. So, and I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway that we hope people get from that is, if one person is experiencing a problem and they file a grievance over that issue, but then there's 10 more people who are also experiencing that problem, but they're not even aware that there's someone else that's also experiencing it. Then it's doing the same bidding as the boss. The boss wants to solve problems on an individual level.
Feeds into divide and conquer.
Yeah. So really, it being invisible to the membership is kind of the biggest issue that comes up with the grievance procedure.
Well, and you mentioned, Keith, that there's like having a grievance procedure, having a contract. These are all steps up. But even the even beyond like just recognizing that as a step up, we can understand how there are at least perceived pros to kind of the grievance mill type of thing. You might maybe be able to point to kind of speedy resolution on a one-on-one basis sometimes, or maybe that is that it's kind of in the shadows is something that maybe the employee who has the grievance wants, right? There may be situations where, like, you know, you're embarrassed of the idea that, oh, I'm being put through the discipline procedure. You know, that's embarrassing for some people, and we need to kind of like get people into a mindset where that is less embarrassing, especially if the problem is a collective one and it's not a problem with this individual worker, which so many times it's not. But the idea that there are people who like sell this as, you know, we just reacted last week on the show to Sean O'Brien on Theo Vaughn's podcast. Y'all probably didn't see this, but he talked about how that he made that as a selling point. He said,
you can't survive as an American worker not represented now that the deck is stacked against you, you know, and you know, the average person, look, you want to go to work, do your job, you know, let us fight for you. Let us take on the grievances at work. You know, don't bring them home. You know, that's the beauty of a union. You know, you don't have to, you have the backing of a union. You don't have to fight with your employer. Make a call and say, hey, you know, to your business agent, you work for me. This is my issue. This is my grievance. I have faith you're going to fix it.
In front of millions of people. It drove me mad. Like, you know, kudos to all the good organizing that the Teamsters are doing under Sean O'Brien, but wow, that was bonkers. And so y'all, you know, you try to point people towards, like, while recognizing the real pros, or, you know, the real and perceived pros of the kind of individual, like, bureaucratic grievance solutions, you try to point people towards, as you were alluding to, Courtney, collective direct action as maybe this can be something that fixes your problems, and maybe this can actually be better. So let's start with the definition. What is collective direct action? Like, when you're pointing people in this direction, what do you mean by that? Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, collective action is taking action with a group of your coworkers. So a group of 2-3 people would be a collective action, but that could be anything from signing on to a petition to march on the boss to a full-on strike, right? So anything that involves you and your coworkers that are coming together to solve an issue is considered a collective action.
Keith, why is that effective? Why is it effective for me to get together with my coworkers and do something like that, like signing a petition or marching on the boss or engaging in strike action or work stoppages or slowdowns? Why is that effective? More effective maybe than a grievance?
Real nice softball for us in our wheelhouse here. Yeah, it's effective on two levels. One, the boss sees that a huge number of workers are active and coordinated and have decided to do something together. And you're already showing that you have some level of democracy, you have some level of willingness to take risks together to do this march on the boss. And that gets the boss thinking, what else are they willing to do next if I don't do this? I'm not just dealing with Johnny anymore at the grievance table. I'm dealing with Johnny and 18 other people or 80 other people who, if I don't treat them seriously and start dealing with this problem, it could get a lot worse.
Yeah,
totally. So it works on that level. The boss starts to not feel as powerful by witnessing our collective power, but then we're building our power as coworkers in a different way. We're showing that we're not just relying on a benefactor or a service agency to take care of our problems for us with the boss. We are figuring it out together, and it's our creativity, it's the relationships we already have from working together that can be turned into something that changes our work life. And that feeling can be the kernel of something much better down the line. You know, we have this idea of a campaign mountain where you need to experience some of this collective action on a smaller scale at lower risk before you're ready to climb the mountain and take much bigger risks together. So trying to help people to climb that mountain. And our hope is that, you know, eventually that scales up to where you can really change the power dynamic of your workplace and even imagine beyond your workplace, like how you can fight for the common good better together as coworkers.
Well, now, Courtney, you know, Keith is talking about all this, and it sounds really nice in theory and like in your ideas and in your head and everything. But does this actually, does this ever actually happen in person, in real life? Does it ever happen that way?
All you have to do is read labor notes to see that it happens.
Easy plug.
LaborNotes.org.
Yes. Yeah, no, actually, it was. I was telling Keith earlier and trying to, think of some good stories here. The first time that we did Troublemaker School in Alabama, it was actually my first Troublemaker School as staff with labor notes, and so it was my first time doing the beating apathy training in person. And we asked this question: how do you usually solve problems in your workplaase? And because union density is low in Alabama, there was a lot of new organizing that was workers who were doing new organizing that had come to the school, and so a lot of the answers that I was getting was, "Oh, we do a march on the boss." And it's funny because in this, when we ask this question, we're expecting people to come back with the, grievance procedures, the way that we usually solve problems. But this group of workers, they were organizing at Amazon, and then there was some USSW Union Southern Service Workers who was doing some good organizing in Atlanta. And so, they were like, we do a march on the boss or just do a walkout,
right.
Oh, wow. So, this happens everywhere. There are plenty of examples of folks who are coming together with their coworkers to take on the boss.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really great to see. And definitely Labor Notes is a good place to read about stories all the time where people are making a difference, by using these sorts of methods. But it is the case, like I said, there's some pros to the real and perceived pros to the kind of typical grievance procedure of getting things done. And there are also obstacles to a more direct action oriented process of resolving these issues on the job. It's not just like, oh, well, we can do like they said, let's do direct action, so let's just do direct action, and like that's the next step. There are obstacles. What are some of those obstacles that is in the way of workers actually taking this power for themselves and doing more direct action?
Yeah, so I mean, in the first question that we go through, that's kind of highlighting how maybe members aren't seeing the union take action on the problems that they care about, and that's why they're not getting involved. But then there's this other layer as well of the boss keeping us disorganized, right? And there are 4 ways that we typically talk about with the boss keeping us disorganized, and that's fear, hopelessness, confusion, and division.
What do those mean? And when you say fear, hopelessness, confusion, and division, Keith, what do you mean when you say those things?
Fear. The boss is instilling a sense in you that if you stand up for yourself, you'll lose your job, or that you'll get a much lousier shift, or there's going to be some immediate repercussions. So don't stand up for yourself. Something bad will happen to you. Hopelessness. How could we change things? We don't have the power to change things. I haven't seen that work before. I haven't seen collective action. What's next? We got uncertain confusion. Yeah. Confusion is like the boss spreading like misinformation of like, oh, like there's gonna be like a $2 an hour raise coming in a few months. Like just stick with it for now, or telling different things to different people so that there's this mix of ideas. There's always a mix of ideas. We never have perfect information as workers, so it's a real one to overcome. And then finally, division, pitting different groups in the workplace against each other. First shift versus second shift. Different racial or ethnic groups in the workplace saying, oh, you can't trust them, or like we're going to give some good jobs to the white workers, and then some kind of internal competition for a few spots up for grabs. That sort of stuff is really dangerous.
But also tiers is another form of division,
the tier
right?
system.
So people doing the same job and getting paid a different wage, those sorts of things.
So what are some good, what are some of the most kind of inspiring stories that y'all have heard of people being able to overcome these obstacles that the boss puts in front of us to engage in direct action and win? How are people overcoming in their workplaces fear, hopelessness, confusion, and division?
Man, this one was a hard one for us to try and think of some good stories, because we get we have so many of these workshops and hear so many of these stories, so it's hard to choose just one. Keith, do you have a good example that you can think of?
A couple come to mind. One takes place at a UAW organized auto factory in Toledo, Ohio, the Toledo Jeep plant, where there's actually a Labor Notes article where one of the rank and file leaders of a March on the Boss writes up how there were layoffs essentially of so-called temporary employees who were actually really consistent, like nearly permanent long-term employees. And Stellantis, the employer, this company, still doing terrible layoffs across the company. But instead of just sort of accepting fear that like, oh, if we stand up, then Stellantis is going to lay off more of us, a bunch of the full-time, like permanent employees said, like, our siblings who have been laid off, like are with us there every day on the line. They get paid less, but they're, now getting laid off. And this is a division that we don't want to accept. So they organized a March on the Boss. They did a petition that got hundreds of signatures around the plant. This is after the stand-up strike in the UAW last year, where this was one of the first plants out. So, there was a sense that like, oh, after we stood up, now management is really trying to repress us, put more fear and division in here. But a group of the rank and file connected with UAWD, the Reform Caucus in the UAW, worked really hard to spread this idea that we can take collective action ourselves and use our break times to get more petition signatures and spread the word and get a group together to march on the manager. And they won some significant shifts. They didn't get everything right away, but it's helped build a culture there where now they have a really solid group that is still talking about how to use collective action and stand up for themselves.
Yeah. Good story that I was just thinking about with when it comes to division and using race in order to divide workers. A story at Twin Peaks, the restaurant similar to Hooters, had very, if you've ever worked in the service industry, you know that it's clearly divided, front of the house, back of the house. Right. Usually back of the house employees are Spanish speaking and mostly Latino workers in the back, and then in the front, they were doing kind of a scale of who was hotter, and that's how they would choose who would get the better sections, was who was able to be more dressed up that day, and it usually went to the white women who were in the front. And so at this restaurant, they were back of the house employees was experiencing extreme, discrimination and harassment. And so they had done a March on the Boss, decided collectively that they were done. They didn't want to take this anymore. They did a March on the Boss and asked the owner to fire this manager who was being racist. And he was racist to the front of the house and back of the house. And so owner didn't do anything about it. So they decided to escalate their action, and they ended up doing a walkout. And front of the house employees actually wasn't aware that this was going on, but when they seen that the walkout was happening and they heard what the issue was, they was like, oh, I'm actually dealing with the same thing with this same manager. I'm gonna walk out too. And so they did a strike on one of the busiest days of the year. I think it was on Mother's Day. They don't, and they're not even represented by a union. So this, we always say that you don't have to be considered a union. You don't have to have a union to consider yourself a union. It's, a group of workers coming together is enough for you to be a union. That's one of the stories that I love to tell, because it's, a good example of, how you can take an issue like racism, which, is typically seen as like an individual issue or handled on an individual level. And you can see how it spread amongst all the other coworkers. They were also experiencing some of those same issues and decided to act together on it.
Yeah, and being able to overcome division like that, it doesn't even necessarily mean like it. from having read that story and your retelling of it, it doesn't sound like there was any real kind of animosity among like the workforce along these racial lines, even though that was kind of there was maybe an attempt by management to make that happen. But sometimes we do see some things like that, and overcoming that division but along these racial lines and whatever other lines might be drawn between genders or immigration status and things like this, it doesn't even necessarily mean that all of the workers involved are like, oh, now they're like totally hip to like everybody deserves everything equally and we're all like on the same kind of page mentally, but you can kind of you can overcome the division by just getting people, in some cases, to see their common interests. And one of the things that I constantly think about like how cool it was is the packing house workers. I think it was in Cleveland. Labor Notes and Jacobin, I think, have both written about this in the 30s and 40s, and how there were black workers and white workers, and there was a black union and a white union, and one union would scab on the other, like not uncommonly when they would strike. And so after like a few rounds of this, they were like, oh, this is kind of dumb. Working. This is bad. That we need to like
do something different here.
Yeah, exactly. And there are interviews from the time of people in the black union saying, oh no, obviously I do not trust these people. These but like I need them, and if they're willing to do this with this one time with me right now, then like I'll take it. And there are similarly interviews of people in the white union still using racial slurs. Like, I don't like N-words, but I need them right now. And they came together, and that union in the 30s and 40s became one of the most through struggle, became one of the most racially progressive unions in Cleveland, was marching for integration before the civil rights movement. I mean, like a really, really inspiring story. And so, like, even if you don't immediately see a like radical kind of recomposition of the ideological makeup of your coworkers, like that's okay, and that's probably not going to happen in your first struggle. It's through struggle that people change. And so that was another story that I always love talking about in these when you get the opportunity. And so the punchline that y'all have in this workshop is that apathy is not real. Yes. Actually, people care about themselves, about their families, about their coworkers, about their work, and about their community, but there are a lot of issues, a lot of obstacles in the way of that, right? And so getting them, like, it's about bringing out those issues. Is one of the big things is actually finding an issue that can clear this hurdle of the existing kind of fear, division, confusion, and I forget the other one, but all the bad things. And so you got to find you have to find the issue, and so how do you pick an organizing issue, an issue to build a campaign around that can overcome all of these obstacles that the boss puts in our way, Courtney?
Yeah, well, I mean, first you have to have one-on-one conversations with your coworkers, right? And so in those conversations, you're kind of building off of the rapport that you have with these people already. So you're starting from whatever connection point you might have, and then you start with, asking questions of like, if there's one thing that you could change at work, what would it be? If you had a magic wand, if this pen was a magic wand and you could change one thing, what would it be? Or asking, is this your dream job? And, depending on their answer, kind of going off from there, right? And so you ask these series of questions to get them to this place where, you're transforming them from believing that their problems aren't solvable to thinking that their problems have solutions and that they can come together and be a part of bringing those solutions if they come together with their coworkers, right? So we start with this, you have to talk to your coworkers. You have to figure out what is it that they care most about. And so once you have a series of conversations with folks and you do it in kind of a systematic way, then from there you can sort of start to identify what the issue is that the most people care about. And a way to identify what makes a good organizing issue is that it's widely felt, it's deeply felt, it's winnable, and it can build the union and build leaders.
And you have to, you're able to find those issues by like having these conversations with your coworkers, and when if a certain issue kind of pops up a lot, and it meets these other criteria about being winnable and something that can build a union, then like that is something that you can build a campaign around. If you're constantly having conversations and somebody's always like, oh, this same problem A, keeps appearing in your conversations, and that can be an issue to build a campaign around. And you mentioned that having these conversations is so important, and having one-on-one conversations is really important, and is kind of the best way to do this if you can make that happen. And you've got a whole big section in this workshop, and actually we're kind of running basically with time with the workshop right now. But the biggest portion is about how to structure an organizing conversation, and we're not going to have time to talk to do the whole big thing, because there's a science and an art to having an organizing conversation. But give us what are the top lines of having an organizing conversation with my coworkers? Keith, what are some of the top lines to remember?
Active listening. You gotta ask way more questions than you're talking at somebody. As organizers, we often have like a grand plan in mind of like where we want somebody to fill into our plan. For this to work, for you to identify an issue that this person will be willing to take action on, you gotta ask a lot of questions and show that you care, and like maybe you've heard of other people dealing with those, respond, help them feel not alone in that. We encourage people after sort of those identifying questions to do some like agitating, like, why do you think it is this way? Who's responsible for this? Like polarize against the boss and be like, who has the power to change this? So instead of feeling hopeless or like this is just built into the workplace, get a conversation going about like, who should be changing this and is not. And then from there, you can get into an ask where you're like, okay, we want to change this. We know who can do it. Are you down to meet with me after work with like 5 other people who I know also really care about this, and we'll come up with a plan together for something to do about it.
Yeah, I think, we really struggled over how to structure the organizing conversation in this training, because it feels sort of robotic the way that people can be trained on how to be on how to have an organizing conversation. Is like there's these steps that you have to go through, right? And it can feel, you can feel that, I think, as the recipient of being organized on. Is you can feel that energy when somebody's like, at the end they're going to ask you to do something and you might not want to do it. So we really shifted like having that organizing conversation to figuring out what are the questions that you can ask that can really get them to come to their own conclusion about the problem, and what to do about the problem, instead of you just like talking at them and giving them the solution to their problem. I think that's a lot of the way that unions typically organize, is they say, we have a plan and we're going to enact this plan and we just need you to sign on to the plan.
Come fill in the blank.
Right. Yeah. But if they feel like, from start to finish, they've been a part of this kind of process, they got to identify the issue. They got to come to a meeting with 5 other people and talk through what's the solution that we can do about this. And then they get to figure out what the plan is around it. It's a much more, it's a stronger way to get people involved for the long haul.
This workshop that we wanted to talk through is, they call it Assembling Your Dream Team, or Building an Organizing Committee. And so it's not just, for like if you're in a new union campaign, obviously, you'll know that you need to build an organizing committee. But even if you are in a currently unionized workplace and you want to build the union into a more fighting union, a more democratic and militant union, you also need an organizing committee. You need a committee. And something that going to several of these trainings with Labor Notes has opened my eyes to a lot, with respect to organizing the workplace in a union sense, is that workplaces are already organized, actually. And so when a Labor Notes trainer says this, Courtney, when you're going to say tomorrow at the workshop, your workplace is already organized, what do you mean by that?
Well, the boss already brings us all together into one place and organizes us in a way that benefits the company. So what we usually do when we're doing this workshop online is I'll take a participant and ask them a series of questions about their workplace. You know, how many different departments do you have? What are the different shifts? What are the different pay scales there? What's the invisible labor? Who can move around the workplace and reach the most people? So you'll find there's a lot of organization already happening that's being done by the boss, right? Which is why they have to actively, disorganize us, is what we talked about in the first session. So the other way that it's also organized is the workers, right? So there's social ways that we organize ourselves. So whether that's, all the smokers who go outside and smoke together, or the parents who get together with their kids after work and, hang out together, or any sports leagues that's happening, or carpools. Yeah, those sorts of social ways that we already kind of organize ourselves in automatically. We ask people to look at that, make a list. Actually, we have folks, if we do this training in person, sometimes we'll get the chance to have folks draw out a physical map of their workplace. And actually visualize how your work is organized. So there's a variety of ways that we're already organized and that we just have to kind of tap into that.
Right. And so that, making a physical map of your workplace, why is that helpful? Why is it helpful for me as an organizer to have a map like this for my workplace, Keith?
Helps you see who's connecting between different departments, who's connected in one department or part of the workplace. Who works together is who has to build some kind of relationship with each other. Sometimes that's a trusting relationship. Hopefully, a lot of the time it is. That we have to figure out how to trust each other and work with each other because we're taking care of each other, watching each other's back while we're on the job together. So this is a starting point for building an organizing team. You want to look at it, ideally to find some units that are already out there that are tight, where people trust each other, ready to stand up for each other. But even if you can't find that, you'll find wait, if I'm cutting out the plasma intake department and I don't have anybody on my organizing committee from this big team, then I'm missing out on a huge chunk of the workplace, and the boss is going to use that to divide us.
Right.
So you need to be thinking with some of those things in mind as you're reviewing the map, but also as you are writing it out, be thinking about things like, where people congregate, or like who can walk freely through the whole workplace. Because in a lot of workplaces, you actually there are certain employees that part of their job is just to walk around all the time.
Maintenance,
like internal mail. Like we still have that at my workplace. I don't know how many people do that anymore, but we've got a guy that just walks around. And that's it, he just puts mail on people's desks. And so he would be super great to be part of the union and be really all about it. You could have him send union messages all over the place. And just having that kind of physical representation of the workplace and some of those relationships is really beneficial. And so looking at this, what are some things that I should be noticing in this map as an employee of CSL Plasma?
Where's the supervisor? Where are they watching most often? That's important.
Right.
Do you have any space that's out of view of management? That's a good place to meet and talk to people. Maybe a starting point in this part of the hospital department.
Yeah, I see you've got the cameras are noted here, some of the cameras. And like you said, that intake, you might realize that I don't know anybody in intake. That's a whole huge department here. Courtney, is there anything else that I, as an organizing committee member, or as somebody who's trying to form an organizing committee, should be realizing about this map?
I think one thing that I was just thinking about was intake here being right next to management. Usually, I'm sure intake, they have to sit still for the majority of their shift. shift. And so making sure that you have a couple of strong people in your intake category here, because management is going to be so close in their ear, really trying to get people on board soon in this organizing process. It looks like the materials and processing here is kind of in a different area and cut off a little bit. So making sure that you're talking to those workers there, and then figuring out where are the places that is out of view of management that you can have these conversations. Like we said earlier, identifying what are those positions that can move freely throughout the workplace, just kind of identifying who do you need to talk to where, and what are the conditions that they're experiencing, and things that you need to look out for.
And then if you're in an already unionized workplace, if you're able to get your hands on the member list, you can actually go through and say, okay, Jane sits here, June sits there, John sits here. And Jane, June, and John, they all sit next to each other in this 4-person kind of cube thing. And there's the 4th person over here, Billy. Billy's not a union member. The 3 of them, one of them should talk to Billy, maybe.
Yep.
And you can do some cool color coding and things like that. And when you do that, you're almost certainly in a union workplace going to realize and be able to see, like, oh, we're really strong in intake, actually. Like, if the union members are blue and the non-members are red, we've got 19 blue dots here and only 1 red dot. We're really, really good there. But in materials processing or in donation, we're not so good. We're only like 50-50. So we need to really target donation or something like that. Those are things that can kind of come out of creating this map and using some of the other resources that you might have. And I mentioned having a member list, and something else that you should be creating as you are building your organizing committee and identifying who to target is a list. And you should have a separate list from your official union's member list with some other stuff in it than just, is this person a member or are they not? So as I am trying to build a list of all of my coworkers, what are some of the things that I should include in the list, like pieces of information in a spreadsheet or something, or maybe even just on a piece of paper?
Well, you definitely want to have your assessment of the person. Are they a supporter of the union? Going back to the bullseye example, would you consider them a part of the core, activist, supporter, or disengaged ring? And then that way you kind of know, what is the question, what is the level of ask that I can have here? So having that assessment is really important to really know what the strength of your union is. Another thing that's really important to include is, what is the issue that this person cares about? If we're going to actually take on issues that our members care about, we have to document what those the issues are and the things that they actually care about. That's 2, I think, vital pieces of information that you would want to have on a list. Whatever other information that allows you to have a full kind of assessment of where people are. So maybe how long they've worked there.
What shift they work is important for when they can meet and who they work with.
Yeah.
And maybe if there are any like relationships that stand out maybe as notable, you might want to make those, right? So I mentioned
BFF with Kathy.
Exactly. Or like if we're going back to this 4-person kind of cube here, we've got June, Jane, and John, and Billy's a non-member. Well, what if for some reason the 3 of those people hate Billy and Billy hates the 3 of those people? Well, we probably don't want the 3 of those people to talk to Billy about joining the union, right? We want to get somebody that Billy doesn't already hate to talk to him. And so it's just another way to kind of understand your coworkers. And so we have, again, in this training, there's a sample list here that includes their name, obviously, the job that they do, the shift that they work, phone number, their email. And this has whether or not they wore a sticker, signed a petition, and attended a meeting. And so what are some things, once you've created this list, that you should be able to identify as an organizer looking at this list and trying to understand your workplace?
I think keeping track of these actions is a really rounded way of getting at the, like, what layer of the bullseye is somebody in? Are they a supporter or an activist or disengaged? Like, you saw they were willing to take the risk of wearing a sticker in front of their manager saying they support the union. That's not nothing. But were they willing to sign a petition, like putting their name on a demand? That's maybe another level. Or were they willing to join a march on the boss or take time out of their evening to come to a union meeting? That's another level of commitment that it's showing. A lot of organizers talk about these as structure tests. You want to see how many people in your unit or in your workplace are willing to step up to these levels. but we want to keep track of it connected to specific people, not just as a number. Oh, we got 60 to do this. We want to keep track of specific people and think of them in this web of relationships in the organization of the workplace.
Right.
Figure out like, wait, intake is like not rising to this. So we need to figure out what will work for them. What are they willing to do? And maybe focus an action that's like working with where they're at.
I also noticed that everybody in the opening shift at least wore a sticker, but the majority of people in the closing shift did not wear a sticker. And so the closing shift, in addition to, like, we can also see that intake is kind of less involved and active than some of the other departments, but the closing shift is also less active than some of the other shifts. And so these are the types of things you will not know, or it is less likely that you will know if you don't write it down or if you don't record this somehow, because the knowledge of the workplace in a lot of situations comes out of doing this work, right?
Part of organizing is we learn through reflection, right? We take an action and then we come back together afterwards and say, well, how did we do? What was the results of that? How many people participated? If we notice that majority of people participated that worked on the open shift rather than the closing shift, then what is it that, the closing shift people care about? What got in their way of participating in this sort of action? So a lot of, kind of this list tracking is a way for us to identify those patterns and see what's working and what's not.
This workshop is geared around building an organizing committee. In this workshop, at least, all of this is all relevant in all facets of organizing, right? You're not only going to refer to your workplace map when you're building your organizing committee. You're also going to be able to refer to it when you're thinking of an issue to build a campaign around. You're going to be able to refer to it for grievance resolution, bargaining surveys, or any number of things. But this workshop is about building an organizing committee. Let's set these to the side for a moment and just think conceptually about an organizing committee. Keith, what are some of the kinds of people that we don't want?
We're going to talk trash now.
Yes.
A lot of us have a coworker who has a real skill at complaints, who has a lot of gripes and is vocal about them. It can be tempting to think like this person, Steve, has a lot negative to say about the employer. That's a good start. That's some kind of fighting spirit if you're willing to be public with your gripes. But that's not necessarily the same as somebody who's willing to listen to their coworkers and bring people together and look out for them. That's not necessarily... Steve isn't necessarily somebody who's won the trust of their coworkers. So it's not a one-to-one thing. Just speaking up is not a guarantee that somebody is a builder of trust, is a listener, someone who others will follow. And we need leaders in our campaigns, not necessarily elected leaders, not talking about formal positions, but people who are already leaders in the workplace, who have some trust, who others will look to as like, well, if Patricia is willing to do this, she's been here a long time, she's looked out for me, she brought me water on the day or there's the heat wave, the boss needs her, and because she's so important here, if she's willing to take this risk, like I can take the risk too.
You didn't spend very much time on talking about the people that we don't want. You went really quickly. You went really quickly into the people that we do want. But that's okay. That's okay. There's a real stereotype about union people being kind of lazy or bad at their job or whatever, right? And that's obviously, we know that's not true, but also that is something that you want to take into consideration when you're building your organizing committee as well, because regardless of what people kind of propagandize about, nobody likes working with somebody who is just objectively bad at their job, right?
Makes your life harder.
Exactly. You're the one that has to pick up slack for this person. And so a person that is actually either objectively or is perceived to be bad at their job, this person is probably going to have a lot of complaints about their employer as well. Probably not somebody that is going to be able to lead a supermajority organization. You have to have some amount of trust in your ability to actually be a kind of productive member of the workforce. And so that's somebody that you also don't want. But, enough of that. Courtney, what are some other characteristics that we should be thinking about as we're building an organizing committee? Who should we try to get on our organizing committee?
I think the simplest answer is a leader is somebody who has followers. So whoever's, who's the person that's organizing the birthday parties or the baby showers or the carpools, looking for that person who has those relationships in the workplace. You want someone who's well respected on the job because they won't be such an easy target for management. Surprisingly enough, we usually use talking heads for this one, and there's one talking head who is vying for a position with management and hasn't gotten it yet, and is pissed off about that. And usually most people are like, oh, I would not want her on the organizing committee because that would be, they're anti-union because they're wanting to get a management job. But really, the other side of that coin is that management also knows who our leaders are. And so they'll pluck them as well, right? So somebody who's going for a management position isn't necessarily, you shouldn't just write them off as, a person that wouldn't be good to be on the organizing committee, but, really see them as a potential, they have a potential grievance here against the company, right? So those are also seeing folks who do have those grievances that are pissed off and maybe in the place of feeling like there's nothing that can be done about it. But yeah, having somebody who's like tired of the boss's shit is always a good, something to look for as well. So yeah, what have we got so far? Leader has followers. They're well respected on the job. They've been there for a while. They have relationships with people.
You want to get leaders, and that's what a leader is. And you also want to try to get leaders to the greatest extent that you can that are representative of the workforce too, right? Totally. Like, it would be difficult to lead an organization without anybody going back to our workplace here from intake. Right? There's a lot of people in intake, and if your bargaining committee, your negotiating committee, your organizing committee doesn't have anybody from intake, it's going to be difficult for you to have that kind of perceived legitimacy, but also it's going to be difficult for you as an organizer to know what the people in intake need if you don't have anybody from there. Diversity in kind of all of the senses, right? You don't want an all-white, all-male organizing committee. You also don't want an all-opening shift organizing committee, even if you've got black, white, men, women, gay, straight, immigrant, non-immigrant, but they're all from opening shift. That's not a diverse organizing committee, actually. But the leaders are really the most important thing. And so it's important to think about who the leader is. And some other things that I've heard in Labor Notes workshops about how to identify leaders is like, think about your workplace. What if a problem happens? What if at CSL Plasma, the intake machine broke? Who do you call when the intake machine breaks? Or who do you call when you have a customer, somebody that you're interfacing with that is being belligerent? Who is the problem fixer? That's a good idea of who a leader is. Like you said, who is the one that organizes the happy hours or the birthday cards or the social events and things like that? They are probably leaders. Who does management look to? You mentioned that people immediately kind of discount that person, especially like in labor notes trainings, but it is worth remembering that most people aren't as ideological about this as we are. They don't see being a manager as
the enemy.
Exactly. They just see this as exactly right. We got to, if we get a leader who doesn't perceive it that way, we got to educate them. But a lot of people don't, and so we can't actually, because a lot of, like you said, a lot of people that are leaders are going to be targeted by management to be management. We can't just immediately cast them off because there's a reason that management is targeting them. I literally just had this happen to me in my workplace. There was somebody that was getting more active in the union, and I was like all excited about it, and then he goes and takes a management position. I still love you if you're listening to this program, but you hurt my feelings.
Just say on this point too is that the dominant ideology in America is that the way to improve your conditions is to work your way up the ladder.
Exactly.
So most people don't really see unions as a way for them to improve their conditions. It's all about being the boss, right? How many songs are there where we're talking about being a boss, right? So I don't think we should count those folks out just because they're wanting to improve their conditions. I think that's a good sign that they want things to change. They just think that they need to do it on an individual level instead of collectively.
We've got to prove how that works. Yeah. We've got to experience that before it feels real.
Absolutely.
Right. We've got these qualities of what a leader is in our head, and then we're looking over our information, we're looking at the map, we're looking at our lists, and we're thinking through our notes from our organizing conversations that we've had. You need to definitely take notes when you're having organizing conversations. I've been in one training where they recommended like taking notes during the conversation. I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. I think that feels like kind of clinical. Like kind of clinical. You want to so you want to have just enough retention where like immediately you get back in the car and you shut the door and you make sure nobody's looking, and then you bring out the notepad. But you want to take some notes from these organizing conversations, and you're reviewing all of this information, and then you're like, okay, I think that Billy Joe is a leader. I reckon this guy, he's a leader. How do I test that? What do I, we've got a hypothesis now, Keith. What do I do to like see if that's true?
I think the first task of every organizer that you're trying to develop is like, can you talk to other people and like learn something from them, like see if they're willing to go out and talk to a few coworkers and learn something, and maybe ask those coworkers to do something. So your first ask of somebody is to go and like do the work you're already doing of like having these one-on-one conversations. There may be people who aren't ready for that or like need an alternative, but I think that's really the one we should always be coming back to. That's like everybody's job in this organizing committee or dream team to be talking to our coworkers and bringing them into the action. We're not just like holding on to like the sacred organizing knowledge ourselves.
Right. What happens if you have a leader that you're not able to convince, that is hostile, maybe even belligerently hostile, but they do have followers? How do you organize around a leader?
Talking to an organizer at Amazon at the Bessemer plant when they were trying to organize that, he had shared how there was a leader, a white supremacist leader that was, anti-union and was, or doing his bidding, right? And I mean, I think the way around that is find out who has a relationship with this group or with someone else in this group and talk to them. Who is that next person that you can try and turn and build that relationship with? And it has to be genuine, I think. I mean, I think, like I said earlier with the organizing conversation, people will feel it when you are coming to them with an ask that's not what they want to do. So I think sometimes you have to be patient and you have to wait. The boss is a really great organizer as well. He'll do a lot of good job in pissing people off. So you kind of have to wait for that moment where the boss will do his thing with pissing this group of people off and you can find your opening.
Exactly. There are a few things that I've heard in these workshops, and there's one in one of Jane McAlevy's books that's really inspiring, and that, like, I may have almost inadvertently tricked you, because one of the ways is that you don't ever actually count them out. You do organize around them, and you try to talk to the people that they lead. And sometimes there are multiple leaders of the same people, and they lead for different reasons. And so maybe if you've got this anti-hostile leader over here, maybe you have a less hostile or a pro-union leader over here that the same people are looking to, and so you target the other person. But sometimes you do have to kind of do the work of organizing under them, and that's going to be much harder than the leader bringing these people along. You're basically having to kind of snipe their followers, right? But also, there are opportunities to even flip hostile leaders. And so in one of Jane McAlevy's books, they're organizing a hospital. There's this, I mean, like really, really belligerently anti-union campaigning, like printing off her own signs and stuff like that. Like, and she wins her department. I mean, almost unanimous against the union, but they win the election. And so what the union did in that situation was they went back to this leader and they say, look, we won the election. You're going to be working under a contract that we negotiate. Don't you want to be part of making that happen? And so they recruited this really belligerently anti-union leader to be on the negotiating committee. And through struggle, like we talked about with the packing house workers and in Cleveland and these other stories, this person was transformed into one of the most pro-union advocates. She quotes from some of her Facebook posts, like before the election and then after they got the contract. And, this person called Jane like crying about like how great the contract was and how much the union is such an important, and it's, so there are opportunities, and sometimes you have to wait for them. But you can't ever totally count somebody out, especially like if they are a leader. You do have to be willing, even if they say like really mean things to you, be willing to open the door again.
And I think another point here too is like they may be anti-union, but that doesn't mean they're anti-Courtney, right? So I could develop a relationship with them and kind of keep that door open and build rapport so that eventually when the opportunity does arise, we can return back to, hey, remember that conversation we had about the union? This is why it's important,
Exactly.
I feel like one of the most common versions of this that comes up is not somebody who's hostile to the union, but a union officer who doesn't want direct collective action. And a big purpose of labor notes is to support rank and file union members trying to build reform caucuses when their officers are not supportive of this sort of direct conflict with management. Thinking of an example in the electrical workers, IBEW, someone we know and love who worked with us for a brief time in Seattle, an electrical worker, had a lot of battles with management and with local officers before, built a reform caucus that fizzled out. But through that had like earned some trust and respect from a lot of workers. Right. And then there's a really bad wildfire up in the Northwest that was just pummeling this Microsoft huge job site, construction site with smoke. Jorge had like built up enough trust that even though officers didn't want to call off the workday, he called the hall. They were, you know, saying like, you got to wait. Sure, it's dangerous smoke, but we're going to wait. Jorge had built up enough trust of his coworkers to take direct action, essentially, to organize around by like building respect over the years and by like on that morning, talking to a ton of folks on the job site, getting them together.
Right. Now you know how to build an organizing committee, find leaders, make the organizing committee representative. Like I said earlier, a big part of this training over the whole day is the exercise on organizing conversations. And so next time y'all or somebody else from Labor Notes is down in Alabama, we'll try to get y'all in the studio to talk about that. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project. And you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.